Chapter 252. Blood and flesh splattered all over the battlefield. A large number of soldiers were dying every second. The orc warrior that rushed up was also killed by a few human soldiers. Finally, after more than 2 hours of fierce battle, the orcs retreated, leaving more than 2,000 dead bodies behind. The soldiers of the Blackstone fortress finally let out a sigh of relief. They were all exhausted after a whole day of fighting. Gavin stretched his sore shoulders while the guards next to him bandaged his wounds. The soldiers who came to relieve the soldiers who had just fought took the place of Gavin. After resting for a while, Gavin walked down the wall with his servants and headed back to the castle. I've heard about Sir Gavin's fighting style when I was in Cult City. I thought it was just an exaggeration, but after seeing it today, Sir Gavin is even braver than the rumors say. Count Wayne exclaimed. He personally understood the situation on the battlefield today. The ferocity of the orcs shocked him. Most of the captains on the wall began to ask for reinforcements in the middle of the battle. Gavin was the only one who led his men and did not retreat. He didn't ask for reinforcements even once. At the same time, his soldiers suffered the least casualties, but they achieved the greatest results. They killed more than 500 orc soldiers in the section of the wall they defended, including several orc warriors. Sir Wayne, thank you for the compliment. Gavin forced a smile and said, You've seen the difference between us and the orc army today. Without the protection of the wall, we are no match for the orcs. More importantly, according to our intelligence, there are at least 100,000 orcs this time. We only have less than 50,000 soldiers. It will be very difficult for us to defend the city with our strength. That's why I beg you to ask for reinforcements from the king immediately. Also, we have lost 4,000 men today, and the orcs have lost 3,000 men. We can't win in a war of attrition. Sir Gavin, I will ask for reinforcements from His Majesty, Count Wayne agreed after some consideration. But Gavin, you know that even if His Majesty agrees to send reinforcements, it will take at least a month for them to arrive. We can only rely on ourselves for this month. Do you have any ideas? Sir, we can only hold on. After a moment of silence, Gavin said, Let's ask the surrounding nobles for help first. They have quite a number of soldiers. Although they aren't elites, they should have no problem defending the city. Do you think those nobles will be willing to send their troops here? Count Wayne sneered. As a noble, he understood the intentions of those nobles. Even if the Blackstone fort was in danger, those nobles wouldn't agree to send their private soldiers here. Sometimes, even if they knew that danger was approaching, as long as it wasn't right in front of them, these nobles wouldn't care. You could say that they were short-sighted and didn't see the big picture. In fact, most nobles were like that. They had their own castles and their own soldiers. Most of the time, they believed in themselves more. Even if we don't hire a private army, we can still hire new soldiers. We need a lot of manpower. They won't know how to use weapons, but they can at least carry rocks and boil water. As long as they are still healthy, we can just ask them to throw rocks into the water. Gavin said. Gavin, if you do that, the soldiers might suffer heavy casualties in the end. Wayne's heart skipped a beat, and he said with difficulty. Those untrained soldiers might sound nice, but they were actually farmers. The farmers had less than a 10% chance of surviving on the battlefield. Do you have a better idea, sir? Gavin asked. Wayne opened his mouth. He didn't have a better idea either. Let's do it then. Wayne quickly recovered. He clenched his teeth and nodded in agreement. For the sake of the Blackstone fort, these sacrifices are worth it. By the way, I heard there's a human city in the wasteland, right? Wayne suddenly thought of something. Gavin nodded and said, You're talking about Northtown City, right? That human city was built by a young noble who bought the land expansion order last year. It's a place rich in sugar and rum. How strong are they? Wayne asked, his eyes glowing. Gavin hesitated for a moment and said, They're quite strong. I heard from the merchants who went there that they defeated goblins, kobolds, gnolls, and even the orcs. But I've never been there myself, so I think it's a bit exaggerated. How could they possibly defeat the orcs when it was just built a year ago? I think the lord of the settlement was just boasting. That being said, they should be quite strong since they were able to hold their ground in the wasteland for more than a year. That's great. Wayne's eyes glowed when he heard the word strong. He immediately filtered out the first half of his sentence. If that's the case, let's ask the lord of the settlement for help. Didn't he want a territory and become a noble? If he helps us defeat the orcs, I'll recommend him to the king. Not only will he be given a title, he'll even be given a land. Alright, I'll send someone to contact Northtown City. Gavin shrugged and agreed. In his opinion, even if Northtown City agreed to help, the army they sent out would not be very strong. As for Duke Wayne's promise, it was fine to just listen to him. Nobles had always been like this. If Northtown City dared to take the initiative to attack, Gavin believed that the lord of the settlement would not be able to wait until the end of the war. Once the lord of the settlement attacked, he would not even be able to withstand the first wave of attacks from the orcs. Under the cover of the night, Gavin picked a few knights and quietly left the fortress. They then moved northeast. The orcs did not block the fortress. After all, there were mountains on both sides of the fortress. It was impossible to surround it. The orcs' camp was not close to the fortress. They also had to prevent the human knights from ambushing them during the night. The next day, the orcs began to move out again as soon as the sun rose. This time, the orcs pushed the siege weapons that they had built overnight to attack the fortress. However, the number of siege weapons was reduced by half compared to the previous day. However, the battle today was even more intense than the previous day. This time, the orcs sent out even more soldiers to attack the fortress. They did not have enough siege towers and siege chariots, so they used ladders instead. These orcs did not care about casualties at all. Since the morning, more orcs had been climbing up the fortress walls. These damned orcs, are they crazy? Gavin said as he wiped the blood off his face after killing the last orc on the wall with a single slash. At this rate, we won't be able to last more than 30 days. The orcs are panicking. Duke Wayne looked at the orcs that had temporarily retreated. The other orc army in the distance was already ready. They don't care about casualties, and they're taking turns to attack us. This method is putting a lot of pressure on us, but the orcs are not having it easy either. Why do you think these orcs are so desperate? Why? Gavin looked at the orcs in the distance and sat down on the ground. I think it's because of food. Food? You mean the orcs are running out of food? Gavin's eyes lit up. Wayne nodded and continued, I've been observing for the past few days. There's very little cooking smoke in the orcs' camp. It's far from enough to feed so many orcs. Then we just have to hold on for a few days, and the orcs will retreat when they run out of food. Gavin stood up excitedly. It's not that simple. Wayne shook his head and said, even if the orcs are running out of food, the pressure on us will be even greater. Without food, the orcs will go even crazier. They will desperately try to take down this place. There are huge amounts of food waiting to be harvested behind the Blackstone Fortress. The orcs will definitely attack us with all their might after they run out of food. That's why we're under even more pressure than before. Duke Wayne said with a serious face. The closer they are to death, the crazier they will be. After the craziness comes silence, and the darkest moment comes before dawn. The northern citadel was actively preparing for war. Sulen was also very concerned about the orcs' attack. Even the northern citadel had to be careful when dealing with an army of over 100,000 orcs. The Eagle's Nest had also sent out many harpies to investigate. Every movement of the orcs was recorded and reported to Sulen. Sheriff Harris was very busy during this period of time. He sent out all 300 security guards to patrol the city 24 hours a day to prevent people from taking advantage of the opportunity to cause trouble. The 2,000 militia were also reorganized. These militia did not need to go to the battlefield. They just followed the security guards to maintain the stability of Northtown City. The army of the northern citadel had also been recalled. They would move out as soon as Sulen gave the order. Lord's Castle. Sulen tidied up a room and turned it into a war room. Other than those who had missions, the rest of the generals and heroes were all there. There was a giant sand table in the middle of the room. The sand table vividly marked out the locations of the Blackstone Citadel, the Orc army, and the Northern Citadel. Who do you think will win in the end? Sulen asked the generals. I don't know. Boulder and Johnson looked at the sand table and then at Sulen. They looked like they didn't know anything. Sulen was not surprised by their reaction. He was already used to it. Kane looked at the sand table for a while and said, I think the Orcs will win. Based on the previous reports, the Blackstone Citadel doesn't have many defenders. According to the Orc strategy, the Blackstone Citadel won't be able to hold on. What about you? Sulen looked at Karina, Grace, and the others. I think the humans will win. After all, the Orcs don't have much food. Chapter 253. According to our information, the Orcs didn't bring much supplies. They will soon run out of food. Once they run out of food, it won't matter even if they double their numbers. Karina thought for a moment and said, I think, sir, there's an emergency. At this moment, a guard hurried over and said. Sulen stood up and walked out of the combat readiness hall. What happened? Sir, there was a messenger from the Blackstone Fortress. He said he was here on Earl Wayne's orders. The guard said respectfully. Earl Wayne of the Blackstone Fortress? Why did he send someone here? Don't tell me he wants me to send out troops. Sulen muttered to himself, then said to the guard, bring the messenger to the living room. I'll be there right away. Yes, sir. Sulen went back to the combat readiness hall and gave some simple instructions. Then he walked to the living room. You are Earl Wayne's messenger? Sulen looked at the travel-worn knight in front of him and said. Yes, sir. After the knight saw Sulen, he quickly said, Sir, the Blackstone Fortress is in danger. Earl Wayne wants you to send out troops to help us defeat the Orcs. This is a letter from Earl Wayne himself. The guard next to him took the bamboo tube and checked it. Then he handed it to Sulen. Sulen took it and looked at it. There was a noble's badge on the wind outlet of the bamboo tube. The seal was not broken. He then opened the seal and took out a piece of parchment to read. The content of the letter was not out of Sulen's expectation. It was nothing more than asking Sulen to send out troops to help them fight the Orcs. At the same time, as long as Sulen sent out troops, he would promise to help him get a title and a land after the battle. The land would not be in the northern wilderness, but in the hinterland of the Kingdom of Florence. At the same time, he also threatened that if Sulen refused, he would not pass the test and would tell the Orcs about what happened in Northern Town City. Sulen sneered in his heart. He didn't believe a single word of the promise. The note didn't say that it would help Sulen obtain these things. It only said that it would report to the king. It didn't matter whether the king agreed or not. At that time, he could use this as an excuse to brush him off. However, Sulen was not interested in these promises. It was not easy for him to develop such a good situation in the northern wilderness. He would not return to the Kingdom of Florence to be the village chief. That's right, the village chief. According to the current level of rewards in the Kingdom of Florence, Sulen would at most be a baron, and then a few villages would be divided into his territory. Take the emissary to rest first. We will consider sending troops to help the Blackstone stronghold. We need to discuss this matter. Sulen pondered in his heart, neither refusing nor agreeing. Sir, the Blackstone stronghold really needs your help. The emissary said eagerly when he heard Sulen wanted to discuss. You go and rest first. We will give you an answer as soon as possible. Sulen waved his hand and signaled the guards to take him away. Seeing that Sulen ignored him, the emissary had no choice but to leave with the guards unwillingly. Sulen was not too worried about this war between the humans and the Orcs. He was thinking about how to get the most out of this war. In his opinion, the best result was that both the humans and the Orcs suffered heavy losses. However, this situation was very difficult to happen. According to the information he received, the orcs were now putting all their eggs in one basket. On the other hand, the humans were not prepared. Although the Blackstone stronghold temporarily blocked the orcs' attack, this stalemate would not last long. According to the information obtained by the Harpies and the Scouts, the orcs did not have much supplies at all. They had to attack the Blackstone stronghold before they ran out of food, and the human reinforcements would take at least a month. Sulen knew how sturdy the Blackstone stronghold was. He had entered the wasteland from the Blackstone stronghold in the past. The Blackstone stronghold was built in the Blackstone Canyon. This canyon was called the Blackstone Canyon because the rocks were black. The walls of the stronghold were 20 meters tall and there were cliffs on both sides. The mouth of the canyon was shaped like a trumpet. The stronghold was built at the mouth of the trumpet. It could be said that it was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Even if Sulen was the one to attack, it would be very difficult to take down this place without him personally. However, he did not know why he had a strange feeling that the orcs would definitely have a way to break through the Blackstone stronghold. Sulen did not know why he was so sure. He did not want to see the orcs win. Once the orcs broke through the Blackstone stronghold, the northern provinces behind the Blackstone stronghold would be plundered. Sulen did not care about this. He only cared about the large amount of food the orcs would obtain. One had to know that the orcs had always been in a state of food shortage in the northern wastelands. If the orcs obtained a sufficient supply of food, they would definitely keep on fighting. When that time came, Northgard City would definitely not be spared. Moreover, the outbreak of war would greatly affect Northgard City's trade. Almost all of the trade routes had been cut off. The migration of refugees was also forced to stop. If Northgard City wanted to rely on natural production to increase the population, it would take at least a dozen years. Sulen did not have that much time to waste. After sending the messenger away, Sulen returned to the war preparation hall and ordered all the warriors to prepare for battle. He did not plan to attack the orcs directly. Instead, he planned to hide on the side and secretly reap some benefits. The next day, Sulen led the army out of Northgard City. He left Hathaway and Chris in the city. He also left 1,000 spearmen and archers behind. He then led the rest of the army and left with the Harpies. The orc army was over 300 kilometers away from Northgard City. It took the city's army 3 days to reach a forest 10 kilometers away from the battlefield. Blackstone stronghold had become a meat grinder. Both the orcs and humans were bleeding here. The ground was covered in blood. The entire valley was filled with a nauseating stench. Some of the corpses that could not be dealt with in time had already begun to rot. The vultures in the sky circled back and forth. After a week of continuous high-intensity battles, the human defenders of the stronghold were exhausted. However, their expressions were still stable because reinforcements had arrived. Although the reinforcements were only a group of farmers who had put their heads down, more would come. As long as there were enough reinforcements, the human defenders believed that no matter how many orcs came, they would all retreat with their tails between their legs. This battle had lasted for a week. Although the human defenders had suffered heavy losses, the orcs had also suffered heavy casualties. Just the corpses piled up outside the stronghold were already 1 or 2 meters tall. Standing on the walls and looking down, it looked like a slaughterhouse. However, they were not slaughtering livestock, but humans and orcs. "General, you're injured." A guard came to Wayne's side. He quickly took out some medicine and bandages when he saw the blood seeping out of Wayne's arm. "It's nothing, just a small wound. You guys can go and rest." As the highest-ranking officer of Blackstone Stronghold, Wayne was very qualified. As a noble, he was obviously different from the other noble generals. He was more popular among the soldiers. The wind in Blackstone Canyon was very strong. A strong wind blew from the north of the canyon, and the strong stench made Wayne frown. The messenger didn't come back. The Lord of Northgard City didn't come. As expected. "Go back and rest. I'll stay here and watch." Gavin shook his head. His body was covered in blood. There were many dents on his tough armor. It looked very tattered. All right. Wayne got up and went back to rest. As the commander, he had to make sure he was full of energy. The night wind whistled. 5 kilometers away from Blackstone Canyon, the orcs were not resting. In the largest camp, the orc priests were feeding some strange creatures. These creatures had a pair of fleshy wings and dark green skin. They had the head of a dragon, but they looked very ugly. Their necks were a bit short, but their bodies were very strong. Their hind legs were very powerful. If Sulen was here, he would immediately recognize them. They were a type of Euron called wyverns. Wyverns were not very powerful among the flying Euron. They were about 3 meters long and had a wingspan of 5 meters. They didn't have dragon breath, but they could spray poison. The poison of a wyvern was very deadly. At this moment, a dozen wyverns were quietly squatting on the ground. The orcs beside them kept feeding them. Soon, all the wyverns were fed. A shaman walked over. That old shaman grabbed a handful of powder from a shabby pocket and muttered some cryptic words. Soon, elemental energy started converging and the old shaman scattered the powder in his hand into the sky. A red spirit light shrouded all of the wyverns. Soon, the wyverns couldn't help but roar. Their bodies were clearly stronger than before. After seeing this effect, the old shaman sighed in relief. Let's start. With an order, a dozen beastmen climbed onto the wyverns' backs with weapons. Each wyvern carried 2 beastmen. The wyverns were flapping their wings, clearly very strenuous. At this time, the shaman once again cast a spell. Wind elements converged and buffed the wyverns. Flight. After buffed by flight, the dozen wyverns carried 30 beastmen and flew into the sky. There was no light in the sky, and thick black clouds covered all the starlight. The dozen wyverns merged into the darkness, and after identifying the direction, they directly flew towards the Blackstone Fort. The wyverns were very fast. In order to prevent humans from hearing the flapping of their wings, all the wyverns flew a kilometer in the air. With the help of the bonfires on the ground, the wyverns carried the beastmen over the Blackstone Fort. Chapter 254. On the other side of the Blackstone Canyon. About 2 kilometers away from the Blackstone Fort, in a mountain kernel. The rocks in the col had already been cleaned up, and the biting cold mountain wind was blowing, letting out endless whistling sounds. There were 3 bonfires lit in the open space, and several dozen sturdy beastmen were scattered around the bonfires. These beastmen were silently sitting on the ground, chewing some food in their mouths and looking up at the sky from time to time. Suddenly, the sound of wings flapping could be heard in the dark sky, followed by a gust of wind. The bonfires in the surroundings flickered, and a few lifeforms with bodies over 3 meters and a wingspan of 5 meters descended from the sky. Their sinister and ugly faces could be clearly seen in the light of the bonfires. They were wyverns. A few beastmen dismounted from the wyverns, and these wyverns once again took to the sky and flew towards the beastmen's camp. The other beastmen nodded at these beastmen who had just arrived, and the simple camp quickly regained its silence. These beastmen had entered the Naphir mountain range when the beastmen had started attacking the Blackstone Fort. These beastmen had gone through untold hardships in the mountains, and after suffering disastrous casualties, they had finally crossed the Naphir mountain range. Among them, there were those who had died in the mouths of various magic beasts, those who had mistakenly entered a dangerous place, and those who had fallen into a bottomless abyss. However, they had also successfully completed their mission. Behind the Blackstone Fort, they had found a hidden valley and set up a simple camp there. After the wyverns returned to the beastmen tribe, they once again took off with 30 beastmen warriors on their backs. The beastmen shamans once again blessed them with flight, and the wyverns once again flew towards the back of the Blackstone Fort. The wyverns continuously transported the beastmen to the back of the fort. Although they could only transport 30 beastmen at a time, many a little made an ocean. The leading beastman warrior looked up at the night sky. It was pitch black without any light. This kind of weather was the best camouflage for the wyverns. For this plan, the tribe had already taken out all the wyverns they had tamed over the years and blessed them with spells, making them undertake the transportation. According to the plan, they could transport about 500 beastmen warriors before tonight's operation. More than 500 elite orc warriors might not be very useful on a large-scale battlefield, but they were perfect as a suicide squad for sneak attacks. Just you wait, humans. The orc army will soon return to that fertile land. Back then, with the help of the elves and dwarves, those thin and weak humans took the land from our hands. Now, we will take back all the land that our ancestors left for us. The beastman leader drank a mouthful of wine and then passed the wineskin to the other beastman warriors. The night wind whistled as a few pieces of firewood were added to the bonfire. The beastmen quietly waited for the wyverns to send more soldiers over. The orcs were born with night vision. Although they were less than 10 meters away, they could see their surroundings clearly with the help of the weak bonfire. Hundreds of orcs could be seen faintly in the darkness of the night. These orcs were silently chewing dry rations. These dry rations were coarse and hard to swallow. They were the unique cold wheat of the north and were one of the few foods the tribe had. For tonight's battle, the orc tribe could be said to be going all out. In fact, since last winter, the orcs had been short on food. They had endured the cold winter with great difficulty, but the appearance of this year's elemental tide had caused a large number of beasts to mutate. The original magic beasts had also become very active, making the already difficult lives of the orcs even more difficult. Rome didn't know what the elemental tide meant, but he knew that the white dragon activity on the ice field had become more frequent. In order to survive, they had to migrate south. As one of the higher-ups of the orc tribe, he clearly knew how important this war was to their tribe. And as the key to victory, tonight's surprise attack would play a decisive role. They couldn't fail. They couldn't fail even once. The orcs' lives were very difficult after losing their fertile land. Without enough food, many of their clansmen would freeze to death every winter. Every snowfall was a test of life and death. Cold and hunger had accompanied Rome since the moment he was born. This time, he wanted his clansmen to no longer have to endure hunger and cold. At this time, the human kingdom was about to have a harvest. As long as they broke through the Blackstone fortress, there would be a bountiful harvest everywhere. Countless grains would be waiting for them to harvest. Looking at the time tool given to him by the great shaman, it was already 2:30 in the morning. Calculating the time, the last batch of orcs should have arrived. According to the plan, they would attack at 3 in the morning, one from the front and one from the back. The Blackstone fortress was built to defend against the orcs. Although it had 2 walls, the southern wall wasn't very high. After all, behind it was human territory. Soon, the sound of wings flapping could be heard. The last batch of orc warriors had arrived. There were already close to 600 elite orc warriors in the small call in front of them. The orc officer's scarlet eyes looked around. Then, he picked up his weapon and walked out of the colonel. Close to 600 elite orc warriors followed behind him silently. Gavin didn't sleep well at night. He kept feeling that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint the problem. This made him a little frustrated. The battle during the day had exhausted his body. In order to prepare for tomorrow's battle, he had to ensure that he had enough sleep. Although he had some doubts, Gavin still forced himself to sleep. Although wearing armor wasn't very comfortable, he had long gotten used to it. Just as he was sleeping soundly, a series of alarm bells rang. Gavin immediately got up and rushed out with the guards who were also awakened. As soon as he arrived outside, the entire fortress was filled with battle cries. In the darkness of the night, there were flickering lights. It was impossible to see how many enemies there were. Seeing this, Gavin made a prompt decision to gather his soldiers. Soldiers of the Thorn's army, listen up. I am Gavin. All soldiers of the Thorn's army, return to your positions immediately. Gavin yelled. Soon, many soldiers gathered around him. Everyone, don't panic. Light the torches. There aren't many enemies. The fortress hasn't been breached. These orcs are a small group that came from the Naphel mountain range. Gavin's personal guards kept yelling, and more soldiers stopped running around like headless flies. However, his actions were too conspicuous in the midst of the chaos. The orcs had also noticed Gavin's presence when nearly 1,000 orcs had gathered around him. "Boss, there's a big fish over there. It looks like the commander of the humans. We can't let him continue gathering his troops." An orc pointed at Gavin, who was shouting in the distance. "Call your men and follow me. I want to kill that human." Rom's eyes flashed fiercely. As he spoke, he led dozens of orc soldiers and charged towards the group of humans. Although Gavin had gathered his soldiers, their formation was already disrupted. They couldn't get into formation in this environment. These humans were already no match for the orcs. Without a formation, their morale plummeted. There was no way they could stop these orcs who were like wolves and tigers. Not to mention, these orcs were all elites of the orc tribe. As soon as the two sides clashed, the human soldiers suffered heavy casualties. The orcs who had just gathered together were instantly stunned. Seeing this, the orcs attacked even more fiercely. Wherever they went, the orcs would scatter like birds and beasts. Gavin was furious when he saw the orcs charging at him. He raised his weapon and was about to charge forward, but the guards beside him quickly grabbed him and dragged him away. Just as the Blackstone fortress fell into chaos, the orc army that had been waiting for a long time bared their fangs at this moment. Siege chariots and siege towers were pushed onto the battlefield. The orc shamans buffed these orc soldiers with all kinds of spells. The human defenders who were attacked from both sides kept shooting arrows at the orcs. However, the chaos in the fortress made it impossible for the orcs to gather their forces. The number of arrows fired was sparse. It couldn't be compared to the number during the day. On the other hand, the orc siege weapons were more than twice the number during the day. It turned out that the orcs had already made enough siege weapons. However, they only used a small portion of them every day in order to numb the humans. Now that it was a critical moment, they directly sent out all of their siege weapons. Wayne, who had just arrived at the top of the fortress wall with his guards, felt a chill down his spine when he saw the orc army attacking the fortress. "Damn the orcs, they have been saving their strength all this time," Wayne said with his teeth clenched. In the eyes of the humans, the orcs were all muscular and simple-minded creatures. However, as the commander of the army, he was being played by the orcs who he had always looked down on. How could he not be angry? However, even if he knew, there was nothing he could do now. Large amounts of siege weapons were being pushed towards the fortress wall by the orcs. The human defenders were in a panic. "Sir, the Blackstone fortress is about to fall. We have to retreat," a few red-robed wizards said after looking at the situation on the battlefield. "No, we can't retreat. The Blackstone fortress is the barrier of the northern provinces. Once it falls, the orcs will no longer be able to stop them," Wayne said angrily. "There's no other way now. Look at the soldiers around you. They have lost their courage." The wizard sighed and pointed at the human soldiers on the fortress wall. The soldiers on the fortress wall had already begun to sneak away. Wayne silently put down the weapon in his hand. As the commander of the army, he could see that the soldiers no longer had the will to fight. The fortress was about to fall tonight, but he was not willing to give up. The night wind whistled, bringing with it a trace of coldness. "Gather, we are retreating." Wayne painfully closed his eyes and gave the order to retreat. Chapter 255. Silver-Winged Knights. Charge. The Silver-Winged Knights, the strongest troop in the Blackstone fortress, quickly gathered and charged south under Wayne's lead. The orcs who were causing chaos in the fortress had already split into small groups. Their goal was not to kill but to create chaos. As long as they saw human soldiers gathering, they would rush up and kill them. Some beast men saw a large number of knights gathered here and wanted to rush over. But before they could do anything, the knights had already charged. Once the 500 knights charged, these beast men were like mantises trying to stop a chariot. A dozen elite beastman warriors didn't even make a splash before they were completely submerged under the hooves of the knights. Behind the silver-winged knights, there were many other knights and scattered soldiers retreating. With the knights opening a path, the orcs in the fortress could not resist at all. Soon, the silver-winged knights rushed out of the fortress. Seeing that the Blackstone fort was engulfed in a sea of flames, Wayne called for one of his personal guards and said solemnly, "Give him the fastest horse. Go to Cult City now. Tell Lord Eric that the Blackstone fortress has fallen. Tell him to prepare as soon as possible. Go now. Quick. The few of you, escort him." Once Blackstone fort was breached, the northern provinces would be the first to bear the brunt of the attack. The only city that could resist the orc army was Cult. Once Cult was lost, the orc army would be able to march straight in. When Sulan received the news, it was already 5 in the morning. He was sleeping soundly with Alex in his arms when he was woken up by a few harpies. When he heard that the Blackstone fortress had changed hands overnight, he was also shocked. Are those humans good-for-nothings? Suluan couldn't help but complain. Originally, he wanted to take advantage of the internecine battle between the orc army and the human army. But he didn't expect that the human army was so disappointing that the orc army was easily breached by the orc army. How did the orcs break into the Blackstone fortress? Sulan asked. The orcs sent out their elite troops. They crossed the Nephil Mountains and launched a sneak attack at night. The Blackstone fortress was in chaos. The orc army outside the fortress took the opportunity to attack the city. The humans were unable to resist, so they could only abandon the city and flee, the harpy replied. Over the Nephil Mountains? Suluan stroked his chin and said, "It seems that there are also some ruthless people among the beast men. But even if it's a small army, it won't be easy to cross the Nephil mountain range. Their numbers won't be too many, but if they want to disturb the Blackstone fort, they won't be able to do it without at least 500 or 600 people. The orcs must have used other methods. When you were scouting, did you find anything unusual in the orc camp? By the way, we discovered some wyverns in the orc camp," the harpy said. Suluan nodded. Wyvern. The orcs actually tamed this kind of wyvern. No wonder their sneak attack went so smoothly. Tell our people to be careful. Don't be discovered by the orc scouts. Also, pay attention to those wyverns. Although wyverns weren't outstanding among the flying Euros, their strength was at grade 3 and they had deadly venom. They were a very troublesome type of Euron. However, the Air Force was still the Air Force. What's the situation with the orcs now? Sulan asked. The orc army is passing through the Blackstone Canyon. A portion of the orcs have started to rush into the northern provinces. Looks like the Kingdom of Florence is in big trouble this time. The Blackstone fortress has been breached. Without this barrier, the northern provinces will be plunged into chaos. Moreover, the food will be ripe in a week. Now is the perfect time to supply those orcs. Once there is enough food, these orcs will be difficult to deal with. Just as Sulan was hiding, the orc army began to advance into the human hinterland. The first to suffer was Wintersun City. They didn't receive any news that the Blackstone fortress had been breached. Then, at dawn, they saw the orc army. Apart from a portion of the orc army guarding the city, the rest were seizing the time to harvest the food. Although the food would be ripe in a week, the orcs couldn't wait any longer. Seeing the orc army outside the city, the mayor of Wintersun City didn't have the courage to go out and fight. He closed the city gates and recruited soldiers to defend. The orc army didn't care about Wintersun City's actions. Wintersun City wasn't as sturdy as the Blackstone fortress. The most important thing now was to harvest the food. After harvesting the food, they would attack Wintersun City. There were only 1,000 soldiers in Wintersun City, and their strength was average. There were 7,000 temporary soldiers, but none of them had ever been on the battlefield. As for wizards, there was not a single one. The city wall was only 6 or 7 meters high, which was far from the Blackstone fortress. Faced with this situation, the shamans in the orc army also made their move. Bolts of lightning and flames were released, and this small city with a population of only 20 to 30,000 was breached by the orcs in less than a morning. The orc army didn't stop. Instead, they went south. The rest of the prepared city started scorching the walls and clearing the fields. However, the orcs came too quickly. Most of the time, the orcs didn't even harvest half of the food. They could only burn it. Even so, large amounts of food were still robbed by the orcs. The entire northern region was filled with humans and orcs killing each other. The orcs kept attacking, and the humans started to resist. In order to completely defeat the humans, the orc army didn't stay in other cities for long. After robbing the food, they saw that the cities were ready. They didn't want to give the humans a chance to rest, so they only left a small number of soldiers to guard the cities. A large group of orcs charged towards Cult City. As the most important city in the northern region, Cult City had been the front line against the orcs 200 years ago. Until the Kingdom of Florence defeated the orcs in a war and drove them further north. Then, they built the Blackstone Fortress. From that day on, Cult City hadn't experienced war for more than 100 years. When Lord Airy Savoy heard that the Blackstone Fortress had fallen, he almost thought that he had misheard. After confirming the accuracy of the news, Marquis Airy immediately issued a war mobilization order. Fortunately, the nobles living in the northern region hadn't completely forgotten the bravery of their ancestors. They were much stronger than the nobles of the southern provinces. Fortunately, Cult City's defenses were well constructed. After continuous efforts, Cult City was finally ready for war before the orc army arrived. The alarms in the fortress rang, and a large group of armed soldiers began to climb up the walls. Wayne and Gavin also led the remaining soldiers up the walls. The two of them didn't run away. They were responsible for the fall of the Blackstone Fortress. If they ran away now, the lightest punishment they would receive after the war was over would be a demotion in rank. It wasn't impossible for them to be executed. So, in order to reduce their punishment, they had to contribute. During this time, Gavin gathered more than 2,000 soldiers. These soldiers were all experienced veterans. As long as they were reorganized, they would be able to fight again. Wayne also gathered a large number of soldiers. He also had a knight order under his command. Since the orcs' invasion, the war had lasted for more than half a month. In this half a month, both the humans and the orcs had suffered great losses. Of course, the humans had lost more. The orcs had captured more than 20,000 captives and slaves. They didn't intend to kill these humans. Instead, they wanted to enslave them. After all the soldiers were gathered, Gavin and Wayne immediately led them to the city walls. Along the way, soldiers were in a hurry. The constant ringing of the alarm made many people aware of the severity of the situation. When they arrived at the top of the city walls, they saw countless orcs. The entire land was covered in greenery. The war hadn't started yet, but many people were already sweating. Below the city, an orc army of tens of thousands had finished gathering. The orcs had completely surrounded Cult City. The orcs had slaughtered their way into the human kingdom's hinterland in order to uproot Cult City. As long as they could take down the city, the orcs would be able to stabilize their territory. The orcs would never be willing to let go of the fat meat that was already in their mouths. Even if this land wasn't fertile, it was still much better than the northern wastelands where the orcs originally lived. For the Kingdom of Florence, the loss of Blackstone Fortress was like a bolt from the blue. If Cult City was taken over by the orcs, it wouldn't be easy for the human kingdom to reclaim it. A low horn sounded, and the orc army began to move forward slowly. After moving into the range of the archers, the orcs began to charge forward with messy footsteps. All the siege weapons were brought out, including siege towers, siege chariots, ladders, and simple catapults in the style of the orcs. Although these catapults looked crudely made, there was no problem with their function. After being covered in a layer of kerosene, the catapults were thrown out and smashed into the city walls. Most of the rocks from the catapults weighed 2 to 3 kilograms. Some of the heavy catapults could even throw rocks that weighed a few dozen kilograms. The heavy rocks smashed into the city walls, shattering the places they hit. The burning rocks caused chaos on the city walls. The humans didn't show any signs of weakness. They also began to bombard the orcs with their catapults. Due to the limited space on the city walls, the number of catapults was much fewer than the number of orcs. However, the humans' catapults were more accurate. Plus, they had a higher vantage point, so their attack range was wider. Rocks flew out one after another. The rocks plowed a bloody path through the orc army. However, the orcs weren't afraid at all. Chapter 256. The orcs and humans unleashed their long-range weapons at each other. The orc army had also entered the range of the human archers. The human archers quickly raised their bows and shot at the sky. A dense rain of arrows rained down from the sky. The orcs raised their crude shields and braved the rain of arrows as they continued to advance. Only a few unlucky ones were hit by the arrows, but to the beast men, the damage of arrows was not high. Ordinary arrows had limited damage unless they hit a vital point. Some of the orcs who were shot pulled out the arrowheads. They didn't care about the wounds at all. After a roar, they charged even faster. The orcs braved the rain of arrows and rushed to the bottom of the city wall. They then set up ladders and began to attack the city. Rolling logs and stones were constantly thrown down from the city wall. The weight of the rocks could easily break bones. Even the orcs couldn't withstand it. Although there were many casualties, the orcs didn't back down at all. They roared and charged up the ladders. The battle became very intense from the very beginning. The orcs and humans had a fierce battle on the city wall. An orc had just killed a human soldier when he was stabbed in the heart by another human. Tens of thousands of soldiers were just numbers on the battlefield. They were expendable goods. The commanders of both sides looked at the battlefield with expressionless faces. Some shamans began to cast spells. The wizards on the city wall did the same. Apart from the wizards, there were also some temple priests in priest robes. Spells and divine spells were cast one after another. Elements surged on the battlefield. Lightning, ice, fire, and other elements were constantly exploding. Overall, the human spellcasters had the upper hand. The Battle of Calant's city was in full swing. Sulen finally made his move. More than 5,000 soldiers from Northtown City and the Harpies began to approach the Blackstone Fort. What did you say? There are no orc troops stationed in the Blackstone Fort? Sulen was surprised to hear the scout's words. Yes, sir. There are no orc troops stationed in the Blackstone Fort. There are only a small number of orcs. What are the orcs doing? Are they abandoning their escape route? Are they not planning to go back to the north? Sulen mumbled to himself. Whatever. It's none of my business whether the orcs go back or not. Boulder, take your men and attack the Blackstone Fort. Don't let any of those beast men escape. Yes, boss. Boulder rubbed his smooth head and grinned, leaving with the group of barbarians. There weren't many orcs left in the Blackstone Fort, only about 100 of them. Facing the barbarian surprise attack, these orcs couldn't fight back at all. The only orc warrior was chopped in half by Boulder's axe as soon as the battle started. Sulen easily took over the Blackstone Fort. No wonder the orcs could easily attack from the back of the Blackstone Fortress. They were basically undefended. Sulen looked at the city wall in front of him, which was only 3 to 4 meters high. There were no watchtowers, arrow towers, or arrow stacks. With the orc strength, they could climb over the wall without any tools. It was a completely different concept compared to the 20-meter-tall walls of the Blackstone stronghold. The people who built the Blackstone stronghold didn't even think about the defenses behind the stronghold. After all, the back of the Blackstone stronghold was the territory of the humans. In the end, the orcs took advantage of this weakness and easily took over the Blackstone stronghold. If the enemy attacks from the south, we won't be able to defend this stronghold at all. Sulen shook his head and gave up on the idea of taking over the stronghold. Indeed, if he took over the stronghold, the orc army's escape route would be cut off. However, if that happened, the northern battlefront city would have to face tens of thousands of orcs head-on. There would be no benefits if he won, but if he lost, everything he had accumulated over the past year would go down the drain. Aiton, have you found the place where the orcs kept the human slaves? Sulen asked. That's right. His current goal was to find the human slaves that the orcs had captured. The northern provinces had been invaded by the orcs, and even a few cities had been conquered. A large number of humans who didn't manage to escape were captured and enslaved. The orcs captured the human slaves so that they could farm. There were at least tens of thousands of human slaves in the orcs' hands. Sulen was very envious of so many human slaves. For the past year, he had spent money to buy and force people to migrate, but the population of the northern battlefront city hadn't exceeded 30,000. If he could rescue these human slaves from the orcs, the population of the northern battlefront city would most likely exceed 100,000. As for the humans you mentioned, they were originally free people and subjects of other lords. When the time comes, those nobles will ask for them from Sulen. Sorry, these are the human slaves that I rescued from the orcs. As for your people, where did they go? The orcs took them away. Go ask the orcs for them. What does it have to do with the serfs of the northern battlefront city if you're looking for your own people? The total population of the Kingdom of Florence was about 5 million. 3 million of them were distributed in the south. The northern provinces had less than 2 million people. Even if they managed to drive the orcs out in the end, they would suffer heavy losses in this orc invasion. If the northern battlefront city had a population of 100,000, it would be enough to establish a duchy. Your Excellency, the orcs have imprisoned the human slaves in a few camps. The closest one is near Winter City. There are about 15,000 people there, and 2,000 orcs are guarding it. Aiton reported the information he had gathered. We have also drawn maps of the other places. Please take a look, Your Excellency. Sulen reached out and took a sheepskin scroll. He opened it and saw a simple map. The Napier Mountains, Blackstone Fortress, and a few cities in the northern provinces. The number of orcs in each city that had been conquered was marked. The locations where the orcs had imprisoned the human slaves were also marked. Well done. Sulen closed the map and patted Aiton's shoulder. As the first drow to pledge loyalty to him, Sulen valued him very much. Sulen's goal was to capture the captive orcs. After the captives were captured, they would be transported to the northern battlefront city. The Blackstone Fortress was the only way. Sulen had to leave a lot of people here to guard it. Now that the humans and orcs were fighting fiercely, neither side could spare any manpower. This was a godsend opportunity for Sulen. Ever since Winter City was conquered by the orc army, the orcs had chased all the humans out. Those who refused to leave were all beheaded. Even after a few days, the city was still filled with the smell of blood. The orcs did not station many soldiers here. It could be said that this city with a population of 20,000 was now an empty city. Outside Winter City, in a simple camp, many humans were working under the whips of the orcs. They were making weapons and armor for the orc army at the front line. After conquering Winter City, the orcs obtained a lot of resources, which they naturally had to make use of. Sulen reorganized in the Blackstone Fortress and left 500 soldiers there. Then, he waited until the sky turned dark before setting off for Winter City. The 2,000 orc army was not a pushover. Even if northern battlefront city could win, they would suffer a lot of casualties. Therefore, his plan was to launch a sneak attack and defeat the orcs in the shortest time possible. Then, he would steal the human slaves. His goal was not to kill the orcs, but to steal a large number of people. Under the lead of the scouts, the army of northern battlefront city quickly advanced under the cover of the night. By 1 a.m., the army had arrived at the outskirts of the orc camp. At this time, there weren't many guards in the orc camp. After the Blackstone Fort was breached, none of the cities in the northern provinces dared to leave their cities. This made the orcs let down their guard. They did not expect someone to attack the orc camp when the orc army was advancing triumphantly. Lord, there are no hidden sentries, Aiton said as he bent over to Sulen's side. Then, let's begin. Sulen nodded and ordered. Then, Aten led 20 drows into the darkness. These drows were proficient in investigation, assassination, and sneak attacks. Under the cover of the night, they easily reached the entrance of the orc camp. At this moment, the 2 orc soldiers were yawning as they stood guard. Suddenly, 2 figures appeared in the shadows behind them. Then, the figures flashed and a dagger with cold light flashed towards the orc's throat. The other hand instantly covered the orc's mouth. Fresh blood spurted out. The 2 orcs widened their eyes and struggled violently to break free. But as the blood flowed out, their windpipes were cut, and their struggles became weaker and weaker. After a few breaths, they fell into a dead silence. Sulen waited outside the camp for a while. Soon, the simple gate of the camp was opened. 2 drows held torches and circled in the air 3 times. After seeing the signal, Sulen ordered the army of Northern Battlefront City to attack. The army of Northern Battlefront City quickly entered the camp. Such a big movement could no longer be hidden. Enemy attack. An angry roar spread throughout the camp. A large number of orcs rushed out of their tents. Seeing the orcs appear, the soldiers of Northern Battlefront City formed a battle formation and rushed forward. The archers in the back also began to shoot arrows. Because the orcs were caught off guard, they didn't have shields. A large number of orcs were hit by the arrows. Compared to the bows of humans, the arrows of the half-elves and centaurs were much more powerful. As soon as the arrows came into contact, the orcs paid a heavy price. The spearmen at the front saw the orcs suffer heavy losses, so they formed a battle formation and began to push forward. Facing the spear formation of the Northern Battlefront City, the orcs roared and rushed forward, but they were blocked by shields. Then, they were pierced by a few spears. Suddenly, the sound of wings flapping came from the sky. Before the orcs could react, a large number of rocks fell from the sky. The orcs, who were already lacking in defense, were smashed to pieces. The more serious ones had their heads smashed. A beast man who looked like a commander roared loudly. He wanted to organize an army, and the surrounding beast men all gathered around him. At this time, a wash basin-sized fireball fell from the sky and hit that beastman commander. An explosion sounded. Orange flames sputtered. The orc in the center of the explosion was blown away. Chapter 257. With the death of the orc commander, the scattered orcs lost their ability to fight back. They were forced to retreat under the attacks of the 3 sides. Soon, they fled in all directions. However, it wasn't that easy to escape. There were still 400 centaur archers and centaur riders waiting for them outside the camp. The battle ended when the sun rose in the east. The orc corpses in the camp were cleared out by the human slaves. The centaurs who were chasing the orcs outside the camp also returned to their groups. As for the human slaves, many of them tried to escape during the battle last night, but they were caught by the harpies in the sky. The humans almost peed their pants when they saw the harpies. The harpies were notorious in the human world. My lord, all the human slaves are here. Except for some who ran out last night and were accidentally injured, the rest are here, a servant reported to Sulen. How many are there? 11,837. Sulen's eyes lit up. Looks like we have a good harvest this time. Sulen gathered the slaves and reorganized them into small groups. He was ready to leave with the human slaves. My lord, thank you for saving us from the evil orcs. Just then, a human walked up to Sulen and bowed. You're welcome. After all, you're my property now. Sulen said with a smile. My lords, we're residents of Wintersun City, not slaves, the middle-aged man said with a frown. Sulen raised his eyebrows. Residents of Wintersun City? I don't have any residents of Wintersun City here. I only have slaves that I saved from the orcs. Hearing Sulen call them slaves, the humans became restless. My lord, we're really residents of Wintersun City, not slaves. Yes, let us out. We're citizens of the kingdom, not slaves. We want to go home. The entire scene became like a bustling market. Endless buzzing sounds could be heard. Silence. A loud roar was heard, and all the sounds were suppressed. The scene became clear. The soldiers of the North Town city also drew their weapons. Seeing the situation, they immediately quieted down. It seems that you still don't know your place, Sulen sneered. You guys don't know yet, do you? The orc army has already entered the northern provinces. They are now besieging Kalt. There are 100,000 orcs in the entire northern lands. Not only here, but there are also orcs in other places. Do you still want to go home? Without my protection, the moment you leave the camp, it won't be long before you are captured by the orcs again. No, it should be killed. The orc army suffered heavy losses last night. The orcs won't be merciful to slaves like you. Don't expect the kingdom to send people to save you. The kingdom's army is currently engaged in a fierce battle with the orcs. They won't be able to take care of you. Now tell me, is there anyone else who wants to leave? Sulen glanced around coldly and said. Everyone lowered their heads when they met Sulen's gaze. Now, I'll give you a chance, Sulen continued after looking around. I am the Lord of Northern City, Sulen. I am the Lord of Northern City. I can promise that as long as you work for me for 3 years, I will release you from your status as a slave and give you a piece of land. In Northern City, you don't have to worry about being attacked by the orcs. After you regain your freedom, I can promise you that the tax on your land will be 30%. As long as you don't break the law, the tax won't increase. After Sulen finished speaking, most of the humans stopped objecting. Some who were still unwilling to accept the result didn't dare to make any moves under the protection of the weapons of the North City soldiers. Soon, the two sides finished a pleasant conversation. Sulen assigned some soldiers and harpies to escort these human slaves to the Blackstone Fort. When they arrived at the Blackstone Fort, these people would be divided into groups of 100, and then migrate to Northgard City in groups of 10. After dealing with the human slaves, Sulen opened the system log to check. Congratulations, host. Under your leadership, your army has defeated an orc army. You have achieved a great victory. You have won the battle. You have obtained 3,620 EXP, congratulations, host. You have obtained a gold treasure chest. You have obtained a star iron. He opened the system space and chose to open the gold treasure chest. The system notification sounded. Congratulations, host. You have obtained the item, machinery control, exclamation point. An ordinary book appeared in front of him. Sulen took the book out and looked at its attributes. Machinery control. This is a book that records advanced mechanical knowledge. It is very difficult for people without a foundation to understand it. After learning it, you will be able to master even more advanced mechanical knowledge. Learning requirement, learned machinery control. It was actually an advanced book for machinery control. After reading the introduction of the book, Sulen's eyes lit up. The machinery control book was very helpful to Sulen. Now that he had the advanced knowledge, he was looking forward to the knowledge in the book even more. He chose to learn it directly. A light flashed and the book disappeared. The next second, a large amount of information appeared in his mind. At the same time, the system notification sounded in his ears again. The host has used machinery control. Machinery control ability has been upgraded to machinery control. In addition to machinery control, Sulen had an advanced option in his skill column. He could choose to advance machinery control to mana technology. However, the advanced option was still gray. He still lacked the advanced conditions. Sulen was very interested in mana technology because the construction of the wizard tower and the floating city required mana technology. Your Excellency. A soldier with a scar on his face and armor came to Sulen. He bowed and said, Your Excellency, when we were patrolling, we found some people in the woods. They claimed to be the nobles of Wintersun City who escaped when the orcs attacked the city. Nobles? According to the laws of Florence, Nobles who abandon their territory and escape during war will be stripped of their noble title and their fief. Sulen chuckled. This was also the reason why the nobles who managed to escape didn't dare to go to Cult City or the royal capital. If they were to go there, they would have to pay a huge price. Even if they could rely on their connections to maintain their noble status, they would lose half of their territory. The current king had always wanted to weaken the nobles' strength. Bring them here, Sulen ordered. Soon, a group of people led by a few soldiers arrived. The leader was a middle-aged man who was more than 2 meters tall. He was wearing a knight's armor, which was full of bumps and dents. A few of them were even wrapped in bandages. Obviously, they had been through a tough battle. The middle-aged man in the lead had a resolute face and a somewhat cold expression. He should have the bloodline of the barbarian tribe in the northern region. He also had an imposing aura that could only be possessed by someone who had experienced many battles. This knight was most likely a general. When Sulen was looking at these people, the nobles were also looking at him. However, Sulen gave them too many feelings. Their first impression was that he was handsome. He was extraordinarily handsome. Ah, this damn sense of immersion. Although humans with black hair and black eyes were rare in Florence, they were not that rare. However, this young man made them feel like they were facing a mountain. They could not help but restrain themselves. The second impression was that he was young. Although they did not know how old Sulen was, they were sure that he was not more than 20 years old. How could such a young man possess such a powerful aura? Moreover, he was the commander of such a powerful army. These nobles were wondering which family this young man belonged to, and which family he was from, had come out for training. However, no matter how hard they thought, they could not find a suitable candidate. There were a total of 15 nobles here, and one of them was seriously injured. Sulen looked at him. If he didn't receive treatment soon, he wouldn't be able to live past today. Sulen then snapped his fingers, and a light green light flashed. Physical healing. Green life energy appeared and integrated into the body of the injured person. The originally serious injury began to recover quickly. Soon, this seriously injured person recovered from a near-death state to a moderate injury. This kind of injury would be healed after a period of rest. These people in front of him were more or less injured. Only a thin figure covered in a gray cloak was not injured. This naturally attracted Sulen's attention. "Honorable sir, thank you for your help." The middle-aged knight in the lead saluted Sulen and said, "No need to thank me. It's nothing." Sulen waved his hand. "May I ask your name? We will visit you in the future to thank you." The thin figure under the protection of the knights walked up to Sulen. Judging from the voice, this should be a young woman. The middle-aged knight with the imposing aura took a step back and stood behind her. "I am the lord of the northern city, Sulen," Sulen said with a smile. "Northern city? Sulen?" Hearing Sulen's words, this person was slightly stunned. Then, she thought for a while and could not remember where the northern city was located in the northern provinces. Sulen's name also confused her. Without a surname, how could she tell which noble family he was? In fact, Sulen did have a surname. This was his name in his previous life. Su was his surname. It was just that according to the customs of this world, Sulen did not have a surname. "Northern city." The middle-aged knight next to her exclaimed. After looking at Sulen a few times, he explained to the noble. "Northern city is the territory in the northern wastelands." Chapter 258. What? The woman in the cloak looked at Sulen in shock. Since when could a territory pioneer defeat an orc army? And these armored, well-equipped, and powerful soldiers were the private soldiers of a territory pioneer? What kind of joke was this? These elite soldiers were as strong as the Gorse knights in the capital. "I'm sorry, Sir Sulen." The woman quickly apologized. "It's fine." Sulen replied casually. He didn't care much about these nobles. He just needed to express some goodwill. There was no need to curry favor with them. Seeing Sullen's expression, these nobles became even more cautious. Honorable Lord of the northern town, Your Excellency Surin, we began to flee after the city was breached. We have been hiding here and there for the past few days. I wonder if you could prepare a place for us to rest and eat. The lady performed a standard aristocratic etiquette and then requested. Sure. Sulen nodded in agreement. Thank you so much, Sir Sulen. You are a true gentleman. After receiving permission, these people were obviously relieved. They didn't have to worry about being captured by the orcs, and they didn't have to wander around in the wild. They had suffered a lot in the past few days. Now, they finally had a place to rest. Sulen waved his hand and asked a servant to prepare a few horses and a simple carriage for them. Then, he asked them to retreat with the army. For safety reasons, Sulen arranged a few barbarian warriors around them. These barbarian warriors were all grade 3 extraordinary professions. No matter what these people were thinking, they wouldn't be able to do anything. These nobles weren't dissatisfied with Sullen's arrangement. They also understood Sullen's intention. The army quickly returned to the Blackstone fortress. Sulen arranged rooms and food for the nobles and didn't pay any more attention to them. After all, he was very busy right now. It was not easy to send all 10,000 human slaves back to the North Town. Fortunately, Suluan had enough manpower now. He divided these refugees into groups of 10 people and a platoon of 100 people. Then, he would send them back in batches. Each batch would send 1,000 people, and there were 200 soldiers in charge of guarding them. The distance between the Blackstone Fort and northern Garrison City was about 150 kilometers. If it was an army marching, it would only take 4 to 5 days to arrive. If it was a cavalry, it would be even faster. However, they were currently transporting slaves. These people would need at least a week to arrive. In other words, a round trip would take at least 10 days. However, this couldn't be helped. After all, it wasn't safe to leave all the slaves in the Blackstone Fortress. It would be troublesome if the beast men remembered this place. Besides, these human slaves were half threatened and half forced by Sulen to be sent to Northtown City. Many of them must be unwilling to give up, and there was a high chance that they would try to escape. However, when they left the Blackstone Fortress and arrived at the northern wilderness, these people had nowhere to run even if they wanted to. Although the soldiers of Northern Town City had cleared the wilderness many times, kobold bandits, goblins, and gnolls still grew like wild weeds. Without the protection of Northern Town City soldiers, it would be a problem for these ordinary humans to survive in the wilderness for a few days. More importantly, the Blackstone Fortress was the only way to enter the Kingdom of Florence from the northern wilderness. With Sullen's men guarding the place, the slaves wouldn't be able to return to Florence even if they escaped. As for following the example of the orcs and taking the shortcut to cross the Napier mountain range, even the powerful orcs had suffered heavy casualties, let alone the ordinary humans. That path was a dead end for them. Sulen selected 50 archers, 50 spearmen, and 100 harpies to escort the slaves. He also announced in front of the human slaves that if they tried to escape, the harpies would deal with them. After hearing Sullen's decision, the harpies flew back and forth in the air excitedly. Their eyes scanned the human slaves back and forth. Even Sulen felt a chill run down his spine when he saw their gazes. 100 harpies. Even a knight would be squeezed into medicinal dregs. The human slaves who wanted to escape broke out in a cold sweat. They threw the thought of escaping out of their minds. It was too cruel. Sulen laughed inwardly when he saw these humans keeping quiet out of fear. He then arranged for his men to start the transportation according to the plan. 1,000 people left Northtown City in batches. It took a day for more than 10,000 people to leave. While Sulen was arranging for the evacuation of the slaves, the nobles were carefully observing this rising overlord of Northtown City. In their opinion, Sullen's rise was too fast. It only took him a year to build a city from a desolate territory. He was also known as the Pearl of the Northern Region. As nobles of the Northern Region, they were curious about him and coveted his white sugar production skills. However, when these nobles came into contact with North Town City, they had a clearer understanding of how powerful the city was. Your Excellency, they're evacuating the people of Wintersun City. We can't let them do that. After seeing Sulen evacuate the people from the Blackstone stronghold in batches, the nobles couldn't remain calm. Although they were nobles, they never cared about the peasants in their territory. But if all the refugees were taken away, only the nobles would be left. How could they still play then? No one would farm for you, no one would work for you, and you wouldn't even be able to collect taxes. You wouldn't even have enough land to feed yourself. You wouldn't even be able to oppress and exploit anyone. No one wanted to be a noble. Therefore, when they saw North Town City's actions, they subconsciously wanted to stop them. Be quiet. The veiled woman scolded sternly, pay attention to where you are. This isn't Wintersun City. Wintersun City has been conquered by the orcs. We're just a bunch of pitiful creatures living under someone else's roof. What are you doing? Are you going to tell him that there are people? Are you going to ask him to give them back to us? The woman's sarcastic voice was particularly harsh. We can't just watch them take our people away. One of the nobles said anxiously. The veiled woman furrowed her brows. Her clear and melodious voice carried a seductive charm. She stared coldly at the middle-aged man who had just spoken. Ever since we abandoned the city and fled on our own, we were no longer their feudal lords. Are you sure you want to argue with Sir Sulen? The veiled woman raised her head slightly and looked at the barbarian warriors not far away. She continued, do you see those barbarian warriors? Do you know how strong they are? They're just some barbarians. How strong can they be? Another noble said disdainfully. The Florentine nobles looked down on the barbarians who were all brawn and no brains. However, they did have the strength to look down on the barbarians. Just some barbarians? The veiled woman shook her head and looked at that person as if she was looking at an idiot. Locke, tell them. Yes, Countess Elia. The middle-aged knight bowed and turned to the others. Let's not talk about the other soldiers. That barbarian warrior's strength isn't below mine. According to my observations, there are at least 100 barbarian warriors. SSS, terrifying. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. In fact, Locke was flattering himself. Although he was also a knight commander and a grade 3 extraordinary, he would most likely lose in a duel with those barbarian warriors. These barbarians had the berserk skill. Although their rationality would be reduced, their combat strength would be much stronger. Locke, are you telling the truth? Those barbarians have the strength of a third order? One of the nobles swallowed a mouthful of saliva as he asked in shock. Of course it's true. Do you think I'm joking? Locke looked coldly at the nobles. I'm sorry, the noble hurriedly apologized when he saw Locke's expression. Locke, can you tell us about the strength of the Northern Citadel's army? Another noble couldn't help but ask. Locke glanced at them and said, I can only tell you what I saw. I can't guarantee that it's all correct. It's fine. Go ahead and tell us. We'll take it as a reference. The Northern Citadel's army has about 5,000 people. Not only are there barbarians, there are also some centaurs and half-elves. There are also about 4,000 humans. The Lord of Sulen has a very high reputation among these soldiers. The army is mainly composed of pikemen, archers, and some centaur knights. In this army, there are many third-grade professions. I don't need to tell you how powerful those half-elf archers are. Also, the Lord can command the harpies. Although the individual harpies aren't strong, their aerial advantage is too strong. To defeat this army, we'll need at least 50,000 regular soldiers. 50,000 regular soldiers? That's so powerful. The masked woman was shocked. She didn't expect the Northern Citadel's army to be so powerful. Half-elves, centaurs, barbarians, and harpies. The nobles couldn't help but exclaim. How did he manage to get so many races to live in harmony? Half-elves, centaurs, these are all powerful races. Why would they join a backwater like the Northern Citadel? Parker, watch your words. The northern citadel isn't a backwater. On the contrary, it's much richer than us. It was the same even before Wintersun was conquered. I really don't understand how he managed to gain a foothold in the northern wastelands. I heard that he's only been a pioneer lord for a year. That means he only used a year to develop to this extent. Chapter 259. Moreover, I discovered that apart from the barbarians, there are many human soldiers who are knights or grand knights. Their leader, Ken, is also a rank 3 extraordinary, the middle-aged knight said solemnly. They are actually so powerful. Then can they help us reclaim Winter City? We can pay them. These nobles had completely forgotten that they wanted Sulen to hand over the civilians. Yes, we can pay them to help us reclaim Winter City, these nobles said excitedly. They had already made up their minds. As long as they reclaimed Wintersun City, they would not be considered to have abandoned the city. Even if they would be punished afterwards, it would not be too serious given their relationship. Compared to the punishment of completely losing their territory, it was too light. Gentlemen, there aren't many orcs in Winter City. It's easy to take it down, but the problem is how to defend it, Countess Ilya said. That means we have to hire them until the end of the war. Everyone looked at each other. There was a huge difference between hiring them to take down a city and hiring them until the end of the war. Thinking of this, these nobles fell silent. I have a better idea. At this moment, a man beside him suddenly said. What idea? We don't need to hire the Northern Garrison Army in a hurry. We can hire them when the war is about to end. This way, even if we hire them until the end of the war, it won't take more than a few days. If we're lucky, it won't even take 3 days, the man said. You're such a clever little brat. That's right. Why didn't I think of that? We can do that. The other nobles nodded. Let's do that. Soon, these nobles unanimously agreed. Only Countess Ilya frowned slightly. She was not optimistic. In that case, we have to start preparing now. When Winter City was breached, many soldiers escaped. There are still many scattered soldiers in the wilderness. We have to gather them quickly. Otherwise, even if we defend the city, we won't have enough manpower. Also, we have to prepare enough Kinnar. When the time comes, hiring the Northern Garrison Army won't be a small sum. We need to divide the work clearly and start the operation as soon as possible. Otherwise, all the scattered soldiers and refugees will be robbed by Northern Garrison City. When these nobles were faced with their own interests, their efficiency increased rapidly. However, they seemed to have forgotten whether Sulen was willing to help them or not. After arranging for the migration of slaves, Sulen returned to the Blackstone Fort to meet with the nobles. After meeting these nobles again, Sulen realized that their attitudes towards him had changed drastically. Previously, they were still very reserved, but now, they were all trying to curry favor with Sulen. Then, they flattered him in all kinds of ways. Suluan finally saw how thick-skinned these people were. He was amazed. The seemingly noble lady was still wearing a veil today, but she was no longer wearing a gray cloak. Instead, she had changed into a silk dress embroidered with gold and silver threads. Such a silk dress would cost at least 100 Kinnar. It seemed that she had brought a lot of things with her even when she was fleeing. She still had to pay attention to her image at this point. In this atmosphere, the conversation between the two sides was naturally harmonious. Both sides wanted to know more information. Sulen wanted to understand the nobles' power in the northern provinces and the strength of the Kingdom of Florence through them. He wanted to judge how long this battle would last and supplement his plan to take advantage of the chaos and migrate the population. These nobles wanted to understand Sulen's attitude and his strength. These nobles even expressed that they wanted to ask Sulen to send troops to help them recover their lost land. Sulen only said a few words on the surface and did not make any specific promises. Through the conversation, Sulen also understood the identity of these nobles. The lady was the Lord of Winter City, Countess Ilya. The remaining nobles were her vassals. don't think that women could not inherit the title. In fact, it was not rare for women to inherit the title in Florence. However, after a woman inherited the title, if she got married, her husband would change his surname. If the child wanted to inherit the title, he would have to take the mother's surname. After a conversation, seeing that Sulen did not agree to their request, these nobles were not discouraged. This was just a test, but they still proposed to purchase food and weapons from Northern City. When they fled from Winter City, these nobles lacked food and weapons. It was impossible to gather the defeated soldiers without food and weapons. Sulen thought for a while and agreed. Although these nobles were not very powerful, they could make up the numbers. If the orcs attacked, they could also help to defend. However, the price of weapons and food was not cheap in Sulen. Of course, he did not rip them off. Of course, paying on credit was absolutely impossible, not even for a countess. Although you had a pair of sapphire-like eyes, a slender figure, a slender waist like a water snake, and a round and perky buttocks like a honey peach, and people couldn't help but want to pat you when they looked at you. It would be a pity if you didn't ride on a tricycle with your slender legs. However, these weren't the reasons why you wanted to borrow money. After Sulen refused to buy on credit, these nobles could only buy with money. As they did not have much money, these nobles bought 500 people a month's worth of food and iron-plated armor and weapons. This made Sulen sigh at the wealth of the nobles. They could still afford so much money in this situation. If these nobles were willing to spend the money on soldiers, they would not have been defeated by the orcs. However, there were no ifs in this world. After chatting with the nobles, Sulen started his operation again. The drows led by Aten did not return. After dealing with the orcs in the previous camp, they continued to search for the next target. There were two cities near Winter City. One was Colin City, and the other was North Wind City. The two cities were similar in size to Winter City, but their fates were completely different. Colin City was attacked by the orcs, while North Wind City was preserved. One reason was that Colin City was on the route to Cult City. The other reason was the North Wind Knights of North Wind City. The North Wind Knights were ranked in the top 3 in the northern region. Of course, the main reason was that the orcs did not attack with full force. Outside North Wind City, the orcs sent out wolf riders to plunder and loot some food. The rest of the food was burned by North Wind City. Though the orcs did not send out their main force to attack, they left behind a team of wolf riders and some orc troops. Their mission was to watch and harass the humans so that they could only hide in the city and not support Cult City. Obviously, the orcs' plan was successful. North Wind City did not send out any troops. On the plains, the human light cavalry and Mount Wolves were about the same speed. Although Mount Wolves had poor endurance, they were enough to suppress the human light cavalry. As for the heavy cavalry, as long as the orc generals were not stupid, they would not fight head-on. Instead, they would harass the surrounding areas. This caused a strange phenomenon. Those who could catch up could not defeat the orcs, and those who could defeat the orcs could not catch up. Therefore, North Wind City sealed the city gates obediently to prevent the orcs from attacking. After Colin City was attacked by the orc army, the orcs plundered all the food and supplies. However, it was still much better than Winter City. At least, there were still many orcs who escaped from Colin City. Sulen received information from Aten that there were only about 5,000 humans in the orc camp in Colin City. The rest of the humans hid in the surrounding woods, and the orc army also left some men to guard the place. When Sulen brought the army to Colin City, he discovered that the orcs were very cautious. The orcs knew about Sulen's sneak attack on the orc camp. Now, all the orc camps were on high alert. But even if they were on high alert, the result would be the same for the North Wind City army. Taking advantage of the night, Sulen used the sky lantern to make the North Wind City army invisible. Then, he launched a sneak attack when he approached the orc camp. The sudden battle stunned the orcs. North Wind City easily opened the camp gates, and the battle that followed was still one-sided. Chapter 260. In the end, Sulen obtained more than 13,000 refugees from Kalin City. To prevent any unforeseen events, Sulen directly brought these refugees to Blackstone Fortress. Sulen didn't get too much food after taking down the 2 orc camps. The orcs wouldn't waste food here. Luckily, the northern city had more food than they could eat. When Sulen set off from the northern city, he brought a large amount of food with him. The soldiers who escorted the refugees to the northern city would also bring some food with them when they left. So even though Sulen had gathered a large number of refugees, he still had plenty of food. After resting for a day in the Blackstone Fortress, he let the refugees rest for a day before beginning the migration to the northern city. The siege of Kalt City was still in full swing. However, the rear of the orc army was also not stable. In order to get more people, Sulen began to continuously attack the camps where the human slaves were kept. In just half a month, 3 of the orc army's camps had been breached. The casualties were not serious, but the human slaves they had captured had all been taken away. This made the orcs, who had high morale, very angry. In order to deal with this situation, the orcs began to search the wasteland. They also deliberately transferred 5,000 wolf riders from the front line. The effect of a wolf rider in a siege was limited. They were basically harassing and chasing. Thus, Chieftain Rogthus sent the wolf riders to the rear. Sulen didn't care about these wolf riders. He had the system's strategic map in hand, so he could easily avoid these wolf riders. In addition, the harpies in the northern city were scouting from the sky. The entire battlefield could be said to be transparent to Sulen. With this, Sulen was like a fish in water in the northern provinces. In order to attract the attention of the orc army, Sulen purposely led a small group of soldiers to harass the orc supply line and attack the orc supply line. This seriously affected the orc army supply line. The wolf riders wanted to follow behind Sulen, but they could only eat his dust. With the help of the harpies and the strategic map, Sulen even pretended to attack a supply line to lure the nearby orc camp to help. Then, he ambushed the reinforcements sent by the orc camp. It didn't take him much effort to defeat a 2,000 orc army. By the time the orcs left with the supply line, Sulen had already swaggered away with the refugees he saved from the camp. Of course, Sulen could play around with the orc army because he had the system and the harpies' help. At the same time, the main force of the orc army was fighting against the humans in Kalt City. They couldn't transfer the entire army to encircle Sulen. They could only let the wolf riders cooperate with the orcs in encirclement, but the effect wasn't good. Kalt City. More than 80,000 orcs had completely surrounded the largest city in the northern provinces. The siege had been going on for half a month. Both sides had suffered heavy casualties, but overall, the orcs had the upper hand. In the central tent of the orc army, an orc man was sitting on a chair covered with an ice-field giant bear skin. He was drinking hard liquor. This vodka is really amazing. I really don't understand how those humans can make such a good thing. The commander of the army, Rugthus, grabbed a bottle of vodka and took a big gulp. Great shaman, our army has been stuck here for a long time. Do you have any good ideas? Another abnormally old orc shook his head. After the crushing defeat at the Blackstone Fort, these humans are very vigilant. They've dispatched Griffin Knights. Although our Wyvern Knights are powerful individually, they're too few in number. And we've also made a mistake. We shouldn't have surrounded the entire city. If only one side of the wall was left, we might have broken into the city by now. Why is that? Because we've surrounded the entire city. The humans have no way out. Naturally, they'll fight us to the death. The old shaman's voice was hoarse. It sounded like he was scratching a wooden board with his fingernails. It was very uncomfortable. Then let go of the southern wall, Rogessus ordered. Yes, sir. A servant beside him walked out of the tent to pass on the order. Where are the human kingdom's reinforcements now? Rogthus continued to ask. An orc general below replied, because we've broken through the Blackstone Fortress and surrounded Kalt City, the human army has sped up their march. In about 3 days, they'll reach Kalt City. The number of reinforcements is around 100,000. They're led by Marquis Winter of the Human Kingdom. Looks like the humans are getting anxious. The Pillar of the Kingdom, the legendary Knight Winter, has also been sent. Rogthus sneered. Chieftain, should we make some preparations first? One of the orc generals suggested. We definitely won't be able to take down Cult City in 3 days. When the human reinforcements arrive, they'll attack us from both inside and outside. We'll be in a passive position. Don't worry, I've already made the arrangements. Rogthus waved his hand. At this moment, an orc messenger hurried in. Chieftain, there's an urgent military report. What happened? Rogthus put down the bottle of wine and asked. Chieftain, we've just received news that one of our human camps has been breached. 2,000 warriors have been killed or injured, the messenger said. Bang! With a loud bang, the thick wooden table in front of Rogessus was smashed into pieces by his palm. We failed again. I'm sorry, Chieftain. The messenger was so scared that he quickly bowed down. He didn't even dare to raise his head. After a while, Rogthus suppressed his anger and said, Have you figured out the reason for the failure? We have some guesses. The enemy seems to have a very powerful and covert detection ability. They seem to know our movements like the back of their hand. Our movements have failed several times because we were discovered in advance. This time, we were even ambushed by the humans. More than 2,000 orcs were killed or injured. The messenger let out a sigh of relief. This was over for the time being. He quickly told the chieftain what he knew. 5,000 wolf riders and 10,000 orc soldiers had been mobilized. In the end, not only did they not catch a single enemy, but they also suffered heavy losses. If they weren't careful, they would lose their lives. A special source of detection. Rogthus pondered for a moment. He then asked the high priest beside him, High priest, we need the help of a god. Although the orcs believed in shamanism, they also had their own god, Gawushan. This orc god was also a powerful god. Although the gods in this world didn't pay much attention to them, they would still respond to their believers. The old shaman didn't speak. He just got up and took some tools. Then he began to pray to the gods. Rogthus didn't show any impatience. He just quietly watched the old shaman pray. Time passed quickly. After about an hour, the prayer finally ended. The old shaman moved his body and slowly got up. Father God told me that the enemy uses harpies for reconnaissance, and they have a strange ability to detect enemies within a range of 20 kilometers. Harpies. Rogthus muttered to himself for a moment, I'll assign the wyverns to your 2 teams. With them, I think you should know what to do. I want you to eliminate that rat as soon as possible. The herald was overjoyed when he heard that Rogessus had allocated 2 teams of wyvern knights. He immediately patted his chest and promised, Don't worry, Patriarch. This time, we will definitely get rid of those rats. Rogthus smiled and said, Then it's settled. I'll wait for your good news. Barton. An orc with a body that wasn't considered strong among the orcs, but he looked very well proportioned. He walked out, Patriarch, Barton is ready for your orders. Although wyverns could fly, their carrying capacity was limited. Therefore, each wyvern knight couldn't be too strong. However, in order to deal with the war, they had to be strong and skilled in martial arts. You take 2 teams of wyvern knights and join the encirclement of that rat. Kill that rat as soon as possible. Do you understand? As you wish. Barton beat his chest with his right hand and performed an orc military salute. Patriarch, don't worry. As long as we cut out those harpies, we will definitely kill those rats in the shortest time possible. The herald said confidently. This is your last chance. If you can't do it, then go and repent to Father God. Rogthus said coldly. His tone was like the cold wind from a glacier, making people feel cold all over. Yes. Yes. The herald's body trembled a few times, then he bowed and left the tent. When he came out, he discovered that his body was covered in cold sweat. Sulen was escorting a large number of refugee slaves with his team. After eating the 2,000 orc army, the orcs finally became well-behaved. They all tightly guarded their camp and didn't attack again. Sulen took advantage of this time to continuously recruit refugees. Many villages outside the city fled when the orcs raided. Now that Sulen defeated the orcs, these people naturally followed Sulen. In this era, there was an unwritten agreement between the nobles and their subjects. That was, the subjects worked for the lord and paid taxes, but the lord had to guarantee the safety of the subjects. If they couldn't do it, then the lord would gradually lose the hearts of the people, and the subjects would scatter. This kind of situation was very rare in the south of the kingdom. After all, there were very few wars in the south. However, in the north, this agreement was still very important. Sulen easily recruited a large number of people. Chapter 261. Including this batch of people, Sulen had rescued around 40,000 people from the northern provinces. If all the people were transported back, the population of Northtown City would reach 60,000 people. However, there were also a lot of problems. The most obvious one was the lack of housing in Northtown City. Luckily, Sulen had built a lot of houses when he was building the city, so they were still able to squeeze in a little. If they followed Sulen's plan and moved 100,000 people from the northern provinces, Northtown City would not be able to accommodate them all. Naturally, Sulen was unwilling to give up the migration now. If he missed this God-given opportunity, it would be difficult to obtain a large number of people in the future. Therefore, even if he knew that such houses were not enough, Sulen still did not stop migrating people. Luckily, he knew there was a shortage of houses. He just told the people to build them as soon as possible. The population of Northtown City had skyrocketed, and the labor force was abundant. It was not a problem to build some houses. Another thing that annoyed Sulen was the fact that the mass migration had lowered the morale of the people. In the system interface, the morale of Northtown City had always been above 90. Sometimes, it would even reach 100. There were many buildings in Northtown City that could increase the morale of the people, but the morale of the people was not static. Luckily, the Lord's Castle in Northtown City had the effect of gaining the morale of the people. After living in Northtown City for a while, the morale of the people would increase. Although some of the buildings in Northtown City did not seem to be very useful, the effect they had was very shocking. For example, the morale of the people. Sulen did not pay much attention to it before, but he did after he recruited the Grey Dwarves. He knew how the Grey Dwarves were. They were selfish and cunning, but the Grey Dwarves in Northtown City were slowly changing. Although they were still selfish and cunning, they were more like the Mountain Dwarves when it came to loyalty to Northtown City. This kind of subtle influence made Sulen smack his lips. There were also the half-elves. These half-elves now regarded the northern town city as their home, unlike before when they thought it was just a temporary residence. The population of Northtown City had increased, and the city was already a little crowded. On Sulen's system interface, the upper limit of the population was 50,000. Now that the population had exceeded the limit, the third phase of the expansion of Northtown City had to begin. The expansion of Northtown City was going to be even bigger this time. It had gone from a medium-sized city to a large city. Sulen did leave some space for expansion when he was designing the city, but he did not expect the city to develop to this extent in just a year. In northern Battlefront City, although a large number of people had arrived and caused the city to become a little chaotic, it was quickly adjusted. The schools in northern Battlefront City had trained a large number of grassroots officials. Although these officials weren't very knowledgeable, they were very familiar with the various systems. They were much more serious and responsible than the grassroots officials of other human kingdoms. Their abilities were also above average. After a period of chaos, the city's operations returned to normal. The newly arrived slaves began to work in groups according to the old procedures in Northern Citadel. Because there were a lot of people, Crazy even sent 3,000 people to Mirror Lake City. Mirror Lake City now had a population of 5,000 people, and they worked under the leadership of the local officials. At the same time, a large number of refugees outside Northtown City began to cultivate farmland. After learning that Northtown City's point system allowed them to earn land, these refugees obviously wanted land. While the construction of Northtown City was in full swing, Sulen sent people to escort the remaining people from the Blackstone Fort to Northtown City. Then, he began to look for targets again. The 5,000 wolf riders of the orcs were a bit troublesome. These wolf riders were very fast and had a keen sense of smell. Sulen was not afraid of the Northtown City's army, but if the Northtown City's army was leading a large number of refugees and slaves, the situation would be troublesome. The wolf riders came and went like the wind. Although they could not beat the Northtown City's army head-on, most of the Northtown City soldiers were infantry. Other than the centaurs, the other soldiers could not catch up to them. It would be very troublesome if these wolf riders stuck to him like glue. This was why Sulen had ambushed the supply caravans before. It was to attract the wolf riders' attention. The scouts continued to investigate. After a few lessons, the orcs had sent more people. Sulen still had not found a suitable target. His target was not the supply wagons, but the camps where the orcs kept the humans. Now that the orc camps had become very cautious, it was much more difficult to investigate. Not all of these camps had human slaves. Some of them were injured orc soldiers, some of them were stockpiled weapons or siege weapons, and some of them were stockpiled with food. Sulen was not interested in these camps at all. Another reason was that if Sulen made too much of a ruckus, the orc army at the front would send a large number of people to wipe him out. When that happened, his plan to migrate people would be greatly affected. After the orc supply caravans had been expanded, they now had 3,000 people. With so many people, even if Sulen attacked with the Northtown City's army, he would not be able to take them down in a short period of time. As time went on, a large number of orcs would surround them. Therefore, Sulen did the same thing as before. He sent out a portion of his men to attack and lure the orc reinforcements over. Then, he would attack the human slave camps. This tactic was simply a matter of time. With the harpies and a strategic map, it was not hard to do. However, the situation today was not right. Have the harpies that were sent out to patrol returned? A guard came to Sulen's side. My lord, the orc supply caravans have arrived. Should we proceed according to the plan? Attack, but be careful. Remember, this is a feint. Sulen thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. The Northtown City's army was divided into 3 parts by Sulen. One part was responsible for protecting the slaves during their migration, one part was responsible for attacking the supply caravans, and the other part was used to attack the orc camps. Among them, the team that pretended to attack was mainly centaur cavalry. When Sulen decided to move the population on a large scale, he had already issued a conscription order to the Philly mission. Once again, 400 centaur cavalry were recruited. This time, they were all light cavalry and were led by the Philly mission. After not seeing her for a while, the little mare looked more mature. She had the aura of a leader. As the matriarch of the centaur tribe, she was very busy. Mission: don't rush too fiercely when attacking. Just shoot with your bow. Sulen found the little mare and said. Sulen was worried that the orcs and centaurs would attack the supply caravans directly because of the hatred between them. If that happened, the losses would be great. I understand. Mission nodded. Soon, the centaurs began to attack. The orc supply caravans reacted very quickly. When they realized they were ambushed, they immediately stood in place and lit up smoke signals. Everything seemed to be going according to Sulen's plan. At this moment, the system suddenly sent a message: the harpies were attacked. The harpies were killed. Oh no, it's a trap. The moment the harpies in charge of scouting were killed, Sulen immediately realized that the orcs knew he used the harpies to scout. Why did they still attack in the same way as before? It was obviously a trap. Retreat. Send a signal to mission. Retreat immediately. Sulen decisively ordered. Yes, sir. A messenger jumped on his horse and immediately ran towards the centaurs. The other soldiers also gave up attacking the orcs' camp under Sulen's order and began to retreat. The little mare mission did not hesitate at all after receiving the order. She immediately changed direction and retreated with the centaurs. Your Excellency Suluan, what happened? Mihian asked with some doubts after returning here. This is a trap. Let's retreat first. Sulen explained and immediately ordered a retreat. But it was obviously too late to retreat now. Just after Sulen's order, the supply caravans in the distance suddenly changed. They opened the tents on the caravans. Instead of food and supplies, the caravans were stacked with wolf mounts. The supply caravans in front of them were all made up of wolf riders. More than 3,000 wolf riders were quickly prepared. They picked up their weapons and began to wander around on their wolf mounts. These wolf riders clearly knew that their mission was to entangle this army. At the same time, a large number of red dots began to appear on Sulen's strategic map. From the map, the orcs' army had already surrounded Sulen's army on all sides. I really didn't expect this. We've been hunting geese all day long. This time, we've been pecked in the eye by the orcs. Sulen's face was a bit ugly. Looking up at the sky, there were more than 10 black dots rapidly approaching. Sulen realized that these were wyverns flying in the sky. Seeing these wyverns, Sulen finally understood. Although the harpies could fly, there was a huge gap between them and the wyverns. Not only their combat power, but their flying speed was also crushed by the wyverns. The harpies' flying speed was not as fast as the wyverns. In order to eliminate him, the orcs had already transferred wyverns from the front line. With the wyverns, the orcs naturally knew the movements of the northern city's army. These orcs have prepared a big formation for us. Sulen looked at the wyverns. Although they were surrounded on all sides, Sulen didn't look nervous at all. Do you really think you can win? Sulen sneered. Order all soldiers to launch a surprise attack on the wolf riders. We'll kill our way out this time. The trap is indeed useful, but be careful. The prey you've caught might be a giant dragon. Chapter 262. Sulen didn't play hide and seek with the orcs anymore. Instead, he commanded the army to charge at the wolf riders. Raise your morale. Boost morale. Lower enemy defense. After a few flashes of light, the morale of the northern city army was boosted. They sped up and charged at the wolf riders. Seeing the human army charging at them, the orcs weren't scared. Instead, they were happy. They had spent a lot of time and effort to catch these rats. Now that they finally caught them, how could they let them go so easily? Alex and his harpies arrived just as the soldiers of Northgard City were charging forward. The harpies had been hiding nearby for the sake of ambushing the enemy. Now that they had discovered it was a trap, they had no choice but to take it out on the spot. The 3,000 orc wolf riders didn't realize what was different about the human soldiers they were facing. In their minds, the humans weren't strong at all. They could only hide behind the city walls and shoot arrows. Ever since they took down the Blackstone Fortress, the orcs had never lost a battle in the wild. Against the humans, the orcs had a psychological advantage. Seeing the humans charging at them, the wolf riders weren't afraid at all. They roared and charged forward, completely abandoning the mobility of the cavalry. However, compared to the human cavalry, the wolf riders' charge was still very strong. Plus, the orcs all used heavy weapons, so they could charge like heavy cavalry. I've finally caught you rats. Brooks sneered. He looked at the human army charging at them and said, I thought this guy was a big shot, but now it seems like he's just relying on his detection ability. At this moment, the sound of wings flapping came from the sky. Looking up, a few thousand harpies were flying over from the forest not far away. Seeing this, Brooks' face changed. Damn it, why are there so many harpies? But before he could figure it out, the human army of the northern city had already charged up. Wind tornado. 2 tornadoes appeared and quickly charged at the orc wolf riders. The tornadoes picked up a lot of dust and other debris. The wolf riders couldn't help but close their eyes. At this moment, the front line of both sides officially came into contact. The military training of the northern city had completely blended into the soldiers' blood. Even if they were charging, the spearmen could still form a formation. The 3-meter-long spears formed a spear formation that showed their power as they charged forward. The first row of wolf riders were instantly pierced by the spears, and they didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. They continued to charge forward, and the orc wolf riders in the front row suffered heavy losses in just one clash. Behind the spearmen, the archers of the northern city were also ready. 500 archers knocked their arrows and shot 45 degrees into the sky. The arrows flew past the spearmen and accurately landed on the head of the orc wolf riders. These unarmored orc wolf riders were hit by the arrows. The bows used by the northern city were made by the gnomes and centaurs. Not only did they have a long range, but their power was also far beyond human bows. Even if they were shot at a high angle, they could still pierce through scale armor. On top of that, these orc wolf riders weren't wearing any armor at all. A large number of orc wolf riders were hit by the rain of arrows. The 2 heavy punches in a row stunned the orcs. Before they could react, the harpies had already arrived above the orc wolf riders. In the next second, a large number of rocks came crashing down from the sky. The fist-sized rocks fell down like hailstones. For a moment, the orc army was bleeding profusely. The charging formation was smashed to pieces, and a large number of orcs were injured by the rocks. The orc army was like wheat being cut down. Row after row of orcs fell. The spear formation of the northern city didn't show any signs of stopping. The 3-meter-long spears were like candied haws on a stick, continuously piercing through orcs one after another. As a qualified general, Brooks finally reacted under the continuous attacks. He loudly yelled out orders. Throwing axes. Throwing axes. The orc wolf riders weren't equipped with bows, but they were equipped with throwing axes. When they were charging, they were very powerful. The spinning axes could break through armor at close range, and if they hit a vital point, they would either be killed or heavily injured. Of course, not all wolf riders were equipped with throwing axes. For the orcs, who lacked iron ore, throwing axes were a consumable item. They couldn't be used on a large scale. After hearing the order, the wolf riders all grabbed the axes at their waists and wanted to throw them forward. However, the wolf riders' formation was already scattered, and there were only a few throwing axes. Apart from a few unlucky ones that got hit, they didn't do much. On the contrary, under the continuous attacks of the arrows and the harpies, the orc wolf riders suffered heavy casualties. When the northern city army was charging, the Little Mare mission had already brought the centaurs to the flank of the orcs. 800 centaurs directly rushed up from the flank. At the very front were 200 centaur heavy cavalry in iron armor. These centaurs were tall and strong, and their iron armor shone with a cold light. When they ran, they were like tanks, destroying the flanks of the orcs. Wherever they went, the orc wolf riders' corpses were strewn everywhere. They didn't have any power to fight back at all. Facing such a situation, Brix was horrified to discover that the orc wolf riders had completely collapsed in just a dozen minutes. The orc wolf riders that he had been relying on were like paper tigers in the face of the human army's charge, and they were easily broken by the human army. The orc wolf riders that had suffered heavy losses began to collapse on a large scale. However, at this time, both sides were completely entangled. It was easier said than done to escape from the battle, not to mention the centaurs and the harpies were constantly attacking from the sky. In the end, only a small number of wolf riders managed to escape. The rest were all killed on the battlefield. The entire battle only took 30 minutes from start to finish. Sulen didn't let the army rest. At this time, on the strategic map, the orc army was getting closer and closer while the northern city army and the wolf riders were fighting. From the map, the orcs had mobilized more than 20,000 orc soldiers and 3,000 wolf riders to surround the northern city army. According to their idea, the wolf riders were responsible for stopping the human army after discovering them and not giving them a chance to escape. In the orcs' eyes, 3,000 wolf riders was a distraction. Even if they couldn't win, they wouldn't lose either. However, they had completely underestimated the strength of the Northern City army. They had also underestimated Sullen's decisiveness. After discovering that they had fallen into a trap, he directly ate the wolf rider. Without the wolf riders, the Northern City army's speed was no longer slowed down. Now, it was Sullen's turn to make his move. The distance of 20 kilometers was not too far. The orc army could reach there in an hour at most. However, rushing like this would make the soldiers tired, and directly entering the battle would cause the soldiers' fighting strength to decrease. Therefore, the orcs did not rush. Suluan estimated that it would take at least 40 minutes for the orcs to reach there. This caused a very serious consequence. Although the orcs had the absolute advantage in terms of numbers, with 20,000 orcs, they were 4 to 5 times more than the Northern City army. However, in order to surround the city, the orc army had split into 4 groups. None of the groups had any advantage over the Northern City army. As a matter of fact, the orcs still didn't understand the strength of the Northern City army. In their eyes, the human army was only 4 to 5,000 strong. Any one of the 4 groups had the confidence to defeat them. Unfortunately, the Northern City army and the Florence army were 2 completely different concepts. Although the orcs had surrounded the Northern City army, they had also given the Northern City army a chance to take them down one by one. Under such circumstances, the defeat of the orcs was already foreseeable. He opened the strategic map and found that the closest orc army to them was the one in the north. At this time, they were only 10 kilometers away. Seeing this, he was sure that this army would be the first to attack. Without cleaning up the battlefield, all the soldiers directly mounted their horses and rushed to the north. It took less than 10 minutes for the 2 sides to cross the 10-kilometer distance. Suluan saw a group of orcs rushing here from a distance. Dismount and get into formation. Prepare for battle. With that order, all the soldiers dismounted and quickly got into formation. By the time the beast men arrived, the army of Northern Town City had already gotten into formation. After seeing the orc army, Sulen didn't hesitate at all. He immediately ordered the army to attack. The orc army had rushed over in a hurry. Their formation was messed up, and they hadn't gained a firm footing yet. This was the perfect time for a surprise attack. No one would wait for both sides to get into formation before attacking. Those who acted like gentlemen would have died countless times already. At the same time, the spear formation was at the front, the archers were at the back, and the centaurs were at the flanks. The barbarian guards were even more powerful. The first to make contact were still the harpies. With their wings, they had the fastest mobility on the battlefield. More than 2,000 harpies flew above the orc army, and then a large number of stones were thrown down. Although the orc army had conquered many human cities and obtained a large number of armor and equipment, it was still not enough for everyone to have one. Only a small portion of the orcs were wearing iron armor. The rest were either inlaid with iron scales or leather armor. Their weapons and equipment were also varied. They couldn't do anything against the attacks of the harpies. Rocks rained down from the sky, smashing the heads of the orcs who didn't have metal helmets. The orc army that was already in a mess quickly dodged the rocks, and their formation became even more chaotic. Seeing this, Suluan didn't want to miss this opportunity. The army of Northtown City took this opportunity to launch an assault. The orc army's defense line was directly torn apart under the attack. Chapter 263. The Northern Citadel's pikemen had been through a lot of battles. Even the weakest pikemen were elite pikemen. The backbone of the army was the heavy armored pikemen. These heavy armored pikemen had all reached the level of knights. In the kingdom of Florence, a knight was at least a centurion. These heavy armored pikemen were very strong in close combat. They were much stronger than the orc infantry. Only the elite orc warriors could fight them, but there weren't many of them. Not to mention, the Northern Citadel's army was well equipped, while most of the orcs only had leather armor. Under these circumstances, the orcs were no match for the northern citadel's army. The orcs originally wanted to kill the humans with their axes, but their vision blurred. They felt a sharp pain in their chest, and the energy in their bodies was quickly drained away. Then, they fell into an endless darkness. The barbarian warriors in the northern battlefront city army were even more desperate. They loved this kind of chaotic battlefield. 200 barbarian warriors were wearing full-body armor made by the dwarves. They were holding giant axes in their hands. The heavy axes were like toys in their hands. Even a strong orc would be cut in half with a swing of their axes. These barbarian axe berserkers all activated berserk, and with all kinds of buffs, they became even faster. They swung their axes like windmills, and wherever they went, corpses littered the ground. Not a single complete corpse could be found. The barbarians were attacking with all their might, and they had no defense at all. However, the dwarven full-body armor they were wearing blocked all the attacks. The orcs were powerless against these killing machines. The archers began to fire, and the continuous rain of arrows caused the orcs to suffer heavy casualties. Following this, the centaur heavy cavalry launched a surprise attack on the orcs' flanks. 200 centaur heavy cavalry formed a conical formation, and behind them were even more centaur light cavalry, attacking from the flanks. The heavy cavalry tore through the orcs' formation, causing the already chaotic formation to turn upside down. The orcs were beaten up by the northern citadel's army since the beginning of the battle. They didn't even have a chance to breathe. The harpies in the sky began a new round of attacks. Large amounts of rocks fell from the sky. The orcs didn't even have a place to hide. The orc army quickly fell apart under the attacks of the northern citadel's army. The 5,000 orcs were completely defeated in a dozen minutes. Large amounts of orcs began to flee. The northern citadel's army killed their way through. Everywhere they went, there were corpses. After defeating the orc army, Suluan didn't continue to chase after the orc army. Instead, he rode to the orc army in the east, which was the closest. The orc army hadn't received the news yet, so they didn't expect the northern citadel army to come from the north. They didn't expect this, so their left flank was broken. The harpies used the same trick again. The rocks fell from the sky. This orc army couldn't hold on either. They quickly fell apart under the northern citadel's attack. Under Sullen's command, they won again. After defeating the two armies, Suluan didn't order his army to continue. Instead, he took the time to rest. Although the results of the two successful raids were glorious, it was also a test of the stamina of the soldiers of Northtown City. From the beginning of the battle with the Wolf Riders, they had traveled 20 kilometers back and forth, defeated 3 armies, and killed tens of thousands of orcs in just 1 hour. It was a glorious result. After such a long battle, the orc army in the east and the orc army in the south had finished regrouping. At this time, the orcs already knew that the other 2 orc armies had been defeated. When they heard this news, the commanders of the 2 orc armies couldn't believe it. After confirming it again and again, they reluctantly believed it. Right now, there were only 2 paths in front of them. They could retreat, or they could regroup and fight the northern citadel's army. These orcs weren't willing to just retreat. If they went back like this, they would lose a lot of soldiers, and they wouldn't get anything. No matter how magnanimous Rogsius was, he wouldn't be able to resist chopping off their heads. Plus, this human army had just fought a fierce battle with the other 3 orc armies. Although they won, they must have used up a lot of their stamina. They didn't believe that the northern citadel's army could defeat the orcs so easily. Therefore, they thought that the northern citadel's army was already at the end of their rope. They couldn't retreat at this time. After a simple discussion, the 2 orc armies merged and charged toward the northern citadel's army. Sulen wasn't surprised by their decision at all. If it was a human, they would most likely retreat. If they pursued, it would easily cause the entire army to collapse. After seeing the orc army continue to attack the northern citadel, Sulen sighed. If the orcs really retreated, Sulen would definitely chase after them. At that time, with the help of the harpies and the centaurs, he was 100% sure that he could defeat the orc army while they were retreating. At that time, all he had to do was chase after them. Since the orcs didn't run, they could only fight. The continuous victories had boosted the morale of the Northern Citadel's army. At the same time, they had a psychological advantage against the orcs. Seeing the orc army advancing, Sulen began to rearrange his formation. When the orcs arrived, the Northern Citadel's army was already waiting for them. After a dozen minutes of rest, although the soldiers hadn't recovered to their peak condition, they were still mostly recovered. Their morale didn't drop at all when facing the orc army of over 10,000. The orcs were even more surprised when they saw the northern battlefront city's army. It was completely different from what they thought the human army would be at the end of their rope. Sulen didn't give them a chance to think. He immediately launched the attack. What surprised him even more was that after he gave the order, a system notification suddenly sounded in his ears. "Congratulations, host. Your army has triggered the special effect of the miracle construction, Triumphal Arch, in this battle. The army on the battlefield has received the buff of the Song of Triumph." At the same time, in the northern citadel far away in the northern wastelands, a different kind of energy suddenly came from the solemn triumphal arch. A faint battle song sounded. The sound was very faint. On the battlefield, all the soldiers of the northern citadel heard the same battle song. When the battle song sounded, the soldiers couldn't help but sing along. A huge aura rose from the army. Their tired bodies immediately became full of energy. It was as if their bodies had endless energy. The passionate battle song made the blood of the northern citadel's army boil. At the same time, the orc army's morale unknowingly dropped. Seeing this situation, Sulen didn't hesitate and launched the first attack. The northern citadel's army that had been buffed to the max launched a surprise attack. The orcs didn't show any weakness and also rushed up. As soon as they came into contact, a fierce battle broke out. At the same time, in the sky, just as the harpies were about to launch a surprise attack, a team of wyvern knights rushed over. Although there were only 12 wyvern knights, they weren't afraid in the slightest when facing the harpies. After all, wyverns were rank 3 extraordinary creatures. In addition to the rank 3 orc knights, even the harpies weren't a match for them except for Alex. The flying ability of the harpies didn't have any advantage when facing the wyverns. Compared to the wyverns, they were like children who had just learned how to walk. In just one contact, 20 or so harpies fell from the sky. It looked like they wouldn't survive. "You all deserve to die." Seeing his own people being wantonly slaughtered, Alex was furious. Wind blade flurry. Slow. Repeating fireball. Thunderstorm. Several flashes of light appeared in a row. A dozen wind blades appeared out of thin air and quickly flew towards the wyverns. Earth and yellow light fell from the sky and the originally swift wyverns instantly slowed down. At the same time, 5 fireballs formed beside Alex. Then, he directly flew towards a wyvern knight. A large amount of lightning energy gathered in the sky and in the next second, a dazzling lightning suddenly burst out. A dozen wind blades rushed to the wyvern's side. The beast-man knight sitting on the wyvern wanted to dodge, but his body sank and he missed the opportunity. The 3-meter-long lance in his hand hurriedly smashed at the wind blade. The lance, which had been activated with life energy, collided with the wind blade and directly exploded. Just as they didn't have time to relax, a fireball had already arrived in front of them. The wyverns quickly dodged, but these fireballs directly exploded beside them and the flames instantly enveloped them. Powerful lightning energy exploded in the air and lightning snakes splashed in the sky. A few wyvern knights were directly electrocuted and numbed. Even the wyverns started falling from the lightning. Fortunately, these wyverns had good resistances. When they were about to fall, the numbing effect finally disappeared and they avoided the danger of falling to their deaths. However, the others weren't so lucky. 2 wyverns that recovered a bit late didn't have time to adjust and fell to the ground. Even with the physique of wyverns, falling from such a high altitude would cause their bones to break. One of their wings was broken and their bodies were fractured in many places. Seeing this situation, the centaur knights wandering around the periphery directly rushed up and easily killed the confused orcs before they could react. The wyvern knights that were hit by the repeating fireball were burned by the flames. The shockwave swept across and their bodies also started falling. However, they quickly regained their balance. After all, the shockwave produced by the explosion had limited effects. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. At this time, a few javelins suddenly flew out from the Northgard city's army. These javelins were powerful and heavy and instantly hit the wyverns. These wyverns stiffened and then accelerated their fall. Chapter 264. Sulen moved his wrists and weighed the spear in his hand. The 3-meter-long spear was thrown out with more power than the ballista bolts. Several wyverns that were hit directly fell from the sky. The 3-meter-long spear pierced through their bodies, and even the orc knights on their bodies were pierced. Seeing such terrible injuries, the remaining wyvern knights were so frightened that they quickly flew higher into the sky, not daring to tangle with the harpies. To these wyvern knights, killing a few dozen harpies was not enough to make up for their losses. How many harpies were there, and how many wyverns were there? To put it bluntly, the value of a wyvern was several hundred times that of a harpy. The orc army had more than 100,000 in total, but there were no more than 30 wyverns in total. They had already used up the entire tribe's strength to successfully tame them. The amount of resources and energy spent was too much for a large tribe like theirs to bear. The northern wastelands were barren to begin with, and the orcs were not good at farming, so the food production was limited. A Euron like the wyverns needed a bison for every meal. In a month, these 30-odd wyverns needed hundreds of bison. Not to mention the cost of capturing and taming them. Every wyvern was very precious in the orc tribe. Now, 6 or 7 wyverns had died in this battle. Such a heavy loss made Barton not dare to tangle with the harpies anymore. Even in Cult City, they had only suffered 3 casualties after fighting against the human griffin knights for half a month. On the other hand, the human griffin knights had suffered more than 20 casualties. Originally, Barton did not care too much about the mission of encircling this human army. After all, in their opinion, this human army only dared to launch sneak attacks. As long as they blocked them, it would be easy to deal with them. In the end, the development of the situation surprised them. After being surrounded, the human army did not have the slightest intention of escaping. Instead, they directly killed the wolf riders that were in charge of delaying them. Then, they quickly ate the 2 orc armies, and then went to fight with the remaining 2 armies. Even their wyvern knight squad suffered a great loss. The wyverns retreated from the battle in a panic. Alex coldly glanced at them and did not give chase. The main reason was that these wyverns were very fast, making it very difficult to chase them down. The battle below was still ongoing, so the harpies could not leave the battlefield. Without the wyverns' interference, the harpies once again launched a surprise attack on the orcs. A large number of stones fell from the sky, and the orcs, who lacked protection, were unable to resist at all. The originally struggling front quickly began to collapse. At this time, Sulen activated the lightning domain. There were no legendary level warriors in the orc army. After all, they thought that it wouldn't be too difficult to wipe out the small army that had been causing trouble at the rear. However, they didn't expect that the 20,000 orcs would be defeated by this small army. What was even more unacceptable was that the commander of this army was actually a legendary powerhouse. They had originally wanted to catch a big fish, but instead, they caught a shark. Not only was the bait eaten, but even the fishermen could not escape. Under the continuous attacks of the barbarian warriors, heavy armored spearmen, spear guards, harpies, and centaur cavalry, the orc army was in a precarious situation. After seeing Sulen activate the lightning domain, it was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. The entire orc army no longer had any intention of holding on, and completely collapsed. Seeing the orc army collapse, the morale of the northern city soldiers was even higher. With the help of the centaur cavalry, they began to chase and kill the orcs. The scattered orc army had no discipline at all. The mountains and plains were filled with orcs running wildly, afraid that they would be killed by the humans behind them if they were too slow. This orc army had completely lost the courage to continue. In the end, even if they managed to escape the pursuit, it would take a long time for them to recover their morale. The soldiers of the northern city were like chasing ducks. They chased the large number of orcs away. Along the way, there were corpses of orcs everywhere. Sulen chased for 20 miles. When he saw that the formation of the army had completely collapsed, he was shocked. He quickly ordered all the troops to gather. The hot-blooded soldiers of the northern city finally came back to their senses. After seeing that the army had completely dispersed, Sulen was also scared. If there was another army ambushing here at this time, with the performance of the northern city army, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Luckily, the orc army did not leave an ambush here. However, this also reminded Sulen that he could not be complacent at any time. Otherwise, he would end up like Chow Chow. I laughed at Zhou Yu's lack of strategy. Zhuge Shaoji. What if I ambush another army? What will happen? That famous scene suddenly appeared in Sulen's mind. He shook his head and swept the scene of why the Prime Minister was laughing out of his mind. Sulen then ordered the army to clean up the battlefield. Although the orcs did not bring any supplies, they still had a lot of weapons and armor. Although these weapons were not as good as the ones in the northern city, they were still pretty good after being reforged. At least these weapons had been refined. Other than leaving a few people to clean up the battlefield, Sulen once again led his men to attack the orc camp where the human slaves were imprisoned. Half of the orc army in this camp had been mobilized. Now that Sulen's attack was unstoppable, it did not take him much effort to conquer the camp. Seeing this situation, Sulen decided to go all out. He directly led his men to attack the other camps where the human slaves were imprisoned. In order to deal with Sulen, the orcs had mobilized half of their army in the rear camp. Only the ones guarding the food were not mobilized. Now, the orc army was wiped out by Sulen. There was no longer an army that could pose a threat to him. Even if Sulen swaggered past the orcs' camp with his human slaves, the orcs just held their camp without the slightest intention of attacking. Sulen ordered his subordinates to gather the prisoners while he checked his harvest. The battle is over. Congratulations, host. You have won an epic victory. The Battle of Encirclement and Counter-Encirclement, July 1687 of the Huiyue calendar. The northern orcs invaded the south. The Blackstone stronghold was breached in a week, and the northern provinces fell. You led the army of the northern city to conduct guerrilla warfare behind the orcs in the northern provinces. You successfully attacked the orc camps multiple times and caused a large number of casualties. The orcs mobilized more than 20,000 orcs, including wolf riders and wyvern riders, to ambush you and your army from all sides. At this critical moment, you led your army to eliminate more than 3,000 wolf riders, then broke through the orc army that surrounded the two sides. Finally, you engaged in a decisive battle with the remaining orcs. In the end, you and your army achieved a glorious victory. Your battle dealt a huge blow to the orcs. As the battle was over, the reputation of you and your army began to spread. You have gained a huge reputation in the Kingdom of Florence. Reputation plus 25, you have defeated the orcs and saved a large number of human slaves. You have gained plus 10 favorability with the nobles in the northern provinces. Your reputation has begun to spread among the nobles. Your charm has increased by 2, so you can easily gain the favor of the nobles. You have defeated the orc army. You have gained 33,560 experience points. You have gained 1 platinum treasure chest and 2 gold treasure chests. The battle is over. You have gained the item recruitment token X2. Sulen rubbed his hands excitedly. He had gained 1 platinum treasure chest and 2 gold treasure chests from this battle. There were even 2 recruitment tokens. The value was not small. First, he went to find some clean water to wash himself seriously, then asked someone to prepare a quiet room. After meditating in the quiet room for a while, Su Len ritualistically opened the storage space. After thinking for a while, he opened the 2 gold treasure chests. There was a flash of light, and the familiar sound of the system rang in his ears. Congratulations, host. You have opened the gold treasure chest. You have gained the skill, Greater Group Haste, increase army speed. Congratulations, host. You have opened the gold treasure chest. You have gained the Tiger Tally, shooting sound camp. Seeing the item in the gold treasure chest, Sullen's eyes lit up. Greater Group Haste, a skill created by the system to increase army speed combined with the rules of this world. After use, it can buff the soldiers under your command with the Greater Group Haste. The spell range is 1,000 people. For every additional 100 people, the energy consumption will increase by 20%. Spell effect, movement speed will increase by 100%. Duration, 1 hour. The effect of the Greater Group Haste was very powerful. It directly doubled the speed of the soldiers. If all the soldiers were buffed with this skill, the movement ability of the Northern Battlefront City Army would be insane. No matter if it was used to attack or retreat, they could completely take the initiative. They could fight if they wanted to and run if they did not want to. The only problem was that the energy consumption was a little high. Su Len played with the Tiger Tally in his hand. He already had a Tiger Tally like this. It was the Formation Breaker. There were 700 Formation Breakers. It could allow the Spear Guard to advance to a higher level of Formation Breaker. This Tiger Tally of the Shooting Sound Camp had the same effect. Commander Tally, Shooting Sound Camp. After use, it can train a special elite soldier type, the Shooting Sound Camp. They can shoot arrows from 100 paces away, rain arrows from the sky, and shoot arrows from the feather forest. They will follow you in life and death. Recruitment, 500 people. Recruitment requirements, Sharpshooter. Recruitment requires 100 units of food. Kinnar, 200 units. Training success rate, 20%. After seeing the recruitment requirements of the Shooting Sound Camp, Su Len already knew that this was the advancement of the archers. Originally, when an archer advanced to become a sharpshooter, they would reach the peak. If they could not break through to become a hero, then their potential would be exhausted and they would not be able to advance for the rest of their lives. However, with this Shooting Sound Camp's Commander Tally, those soldiers who reached the level of a sharpshooter could advance again as long as they passed the test. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.